A 8-year-old boy is sprinting alone down a pitch-black highway in 30-degree wind, his sneakers slapping wet asphalt, his lungs burning with every step. Behind him, his mother is dying in a car that won't start. Ahead of him, through the frozen dark, the only light in the world belongs to a building that shakes with engine noise and the kind of laughter that makes grown men cross the street. He doesn't slow down. He hits the door at a dead run and throws it open, and 600 of the most dangerous-looking human beings on Earth turn to look at a little boy standing alone in the doorway. And he says one word, just one. And the room goes so quiet you can hear the neon buzz. If this story already has your heart beating faster, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because the roads we travel on this channel will take you places you never expected. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city and country you're watching from tonight. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now settle in, because what happened next in that bar is something nobody in Sturgis will ever forget. The rally had been running for 4 days by the time Thursday evening arrived, and Sturgis had long since stopped resembling the quiet South Dakota town it was the other 51 weeks of the year. The streets were a slow river of chrome and exhaust and leather, thousands of machines moving through the grid in low rumbling waves, their engines talking to each other in a language that had no translation for people who hadn't spent years learning to hear it. Every parking lot was full. Every bar had a line. The sky above Main Street held the particular orange-gray hue of a sunset fighting through engine smoke and dust. And it was the kind of sky that made even people who lived hard lives pause and think about something they couldn't name. Marcus Kane didn't pause. He hadn't paused for much of anything in the last 7 years. He walked through the back corridor of the Thunder Road Saloon with the particular stride of a man who had learned long ago that moving with purpose kept people from asking questions. He was 52, built like someone who had done physical work for 3 decades and then one day simply stopped caring whether his body recovered properly. The gray in his beard had been there since he was 43. The scar running from his left ear to the edge of his jaw was from a wreck in Wyoming, though he rarely mentioned it, and when he did, he described it with the flat factuality of someone reporting a weather event. His cut, the leather vest worn by every full-patch member of the Iron Covenant motorcycle brotherhood, was worn at the collar and dark with years of oil and weather and the kind of use that couldn't be manufactured. It fit him the way skin fits a person. It had no decoration that wasn't earned. The brotherhood had been riding together for 23 years. They weren't the largest club at Sturgis. They weren't the most well-known. But among the people who understood the culture, really understood it, past the merchandise and the weekend warriors and the magazine covers, the Iron Covenant carried a particular weight. They had 600 members spread across 11 states, and every single one of them had been through something. Not as a slogan, not as a brand identity, as a fact of membership. You didn't patch into the Iron Covenant because you liked motorcycles. You patched in because at some point the rest of the world had failed to hold you up, and the Brotherhood had done it instead, and you understood in your bones what that debt required of you going forward. Marcus had been president of the Sturgis chapter for 9 years. He pushed open the door to the main room, and the sound hit him like a wall. Not just volume, but texture. 600 voices in conversation and laughter, the percussion of bottles on bar tops, a band in the far corner working through something slow and deliberate that nobody was really listening to, but everyone could feel. The Thunder Road Saloon was not a small building, but 600 people and as many attitudes made it feel like a living thing with its own pressure system. The air was warm and close and smelled of beer and leather and the particular combination of wood and age that old buildings in the West carry in their walls. He spotted Derek Sloan at the bar. Not hard, since Derek was one of the few men in the room who could make Marcus feel like he might be standing close to something slightly unpredictable. Derek was 44, former Army combat medic, 3 tours in places that had left specific marks on his face and hands, and the way he held himself when he thought nobody was watching. He'd been patched in 6 years ago, and he carried his medical training the way some men carry weapons, quietly, always present, available without announcement. He was drinking something that was probably just soda water, because Derek rarely drank when he was at a public event. He said it was about staying sharp. Marcus suspected it was also about something older and more private than that. "You ready for the toast?" Derek asked without looking up. "No." "Good. You're always better when you're not ready." Marcus pulled up a stool and rested his forearms on the bar. The wood was sticky in the way that meant it had been wiped down recently, but not recently enough. He looked at the room, at the faces he knew, the patches he recognized, the handful of civilians who had wandered in from the street and were now sitting very still in the middle of all that leather and noise, doing the math on whether they'd made a mistake. He didn't think they had, but he understood why they would wonder. "The new prospects," Marcus said. "They ready?" "3 of them, maybe. Kelly's still wound too tight. He'll either loosen up or he'll wash out before winter." He ran toward the accident on Route 34 last month without being asked. Derek considered that. Yeah, he did. That counts more than being loose. The toast was a brotherhood tradition at the annual rally. The president stood before the assembled members and whoever happened to be in the bar at the time, and he delivered something that wasn't quite a speech and wasn't quite a prayer. It was more like a statement of account, who the brotherhood was, what they owed to each other, what it cost to be the kind of people who showed up. Marcus had delivered it twice before. Both times he had spoken for less than 4 minutes, and both times men who had survived wars and accidents and losses of every description had gone quiet, in a way they didn't go quiet for much else. He didn't like doing it. That was also why he was good at it. He was still working out the words in the back of his mind when the door at the far end of the room opened with a bang, and the cold came in with it, sudden and sharp, cutting through the warmth like something deliberate. Every head turned. That was just physics. Sound and temperature change, the door's impact against the wall. Every head turned the way heads turn when the unexpected enters a room. The boy was standing in the doorway. He was small. 8 years old, though Marcus would only learn that later. He was wearing a jacket that was not warm enough for the temperature outside. A thin navy zip-up, the kind sold in big box stores for $12. And his sneakers were wet and his face was the color of old paper. He was breathing in ragged pulls, the breathing of someone who has been running hard and running scared and has no breath left to hide either of those things. His eyes swept the room and found 600 pairs of eyes looking back at him. And for a moment, just a moment, something flickered across his face that suggested he was questioning the decision that had brought him here. He didn't run. That was the thing Marcus noticed first. The boy did not run. He opened his mouth and one word came out of it, barely loud enough to carry across the room, but the room had gone so quiet that it didn't need to be loud. "Help!" The word hung in the warm air. Marcus was already off the stool. He moved through the crowd before he'd made a conscious decision to do so, and the crowd moved for him, not because they were told to, but because they had all seen the same thing and something in the Brotherhood's blood had recognized it the same instant Marcus had. Derek was a half step behind him. By the time Marcus had crossed the room and was crouching in front of the boy, he could feel the rest of the room shifting, redistributing, the quiet spreading outward like something dropped in still water. He went to one knee. He did it deliberately, not just to get to eye level, but because a man of his size and appearance going to one knee in front of a frightened child sends a specific message that words take longer to deliver. "Hey," he said. His voice was low. Not soft exactly. Marcus Kane did not really do soft, but level, controlled. The voice he used when things were bad and getting worse and someone needed an anchor. "I'm Marcus. What's your name?" The boy stared at him. Up close, Marcus could see the boy's lips were slightly blue, and there was dried mud on his right knee from where he'd fallen on the highway and gotten back up without stopping. "Noah," the boy said. "Okay, Noah. You're inside now. You ran to get here?" A nod. "How far?" "The highway." He swallowed. "Maybe a mile. I don't know. My mom—" And here his voice cracked for the first time, and the crack was quiet and devastating in the way that only a child's voice can be when they are trying to be brave and failing slightly. "My mom won't wake up. She was sick, and then she fell asleep, and I can't wake her up." Marcus had been trained to triage, not medically. That was Derek's territory. But in the general sense of someone who had spent a lifetime making fast decisions in conditions where the wrong fast decision had consequences. He processed what the boy had said in about 2 seconds, isolated the operative elements, and made a call. He stood up and turned. Derek was already there. "Diabetic," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe. Unconscious in a vehicle, highway, approximately 1 mile. Get your kit." Derek was already moving. Marcus turned back to Noah and put one large, rough hand on the boy's shoulder, gently, the way you handle something you understand to be fragile without making it feel like you think it's fragile. Is anyone else with her? Anyone else in the car? No. Noah shook his head. Just us. We were driving to Montana. The car stopped and she said she felt funny, and then he couldn't finish it. Okay. Marcus squeezed the shoulder once. Here's what's going to happen. My brother Derek is a medic. He's going to your mom right now. I need you to stay with me and tell me exactly where on the highway. Can you do that? Noah looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked past Marcus at the 600 faces watching from the interior of the bar. All those tattoos and beards and road-worn eyes and leather vests. And something remarkable happened on the boy's face. It wasn't comfort exactly. It wasn't quite trust. It was something more primitive than either of those things. It was the recognition, somewhere below thought, that the people in this room were not going to let anything else go wrong tonight if they could help it. Yeah, Noah said. I can do that. Behind Marcus, boots were already hitting the wooden floor in a rhythm that sounded, if you closed your eyes, like distant thunder. The crowd didn't surge. That was the thing outsiders would never quite believe when they heard about it afterward. 600 bikers in a bar, confronted with a child in crisis, and there was no surge, no chaos, no mob quality to the way they moved. They organized. Without a signal and without a directive, and with only the shared understanding that came from years of riding together in conditions that didn't permit confusion, they reorganized the entire room in under 3 minutes. Men who knew medicine identified themselves to Derek without being asked. Men who knew the highway grid of the area produced phones and talked to each other in quick, efficient exchanges. Prospects who had not yet learned to be useful at least learned to stay out of the way, and the members who understood crowd management, several of them former military, 2 of them former first responders, created a kind of informal perimeter around Noah that kept the noise and mass of the room from pressing in on him. The boy was being given hot chocolate that materialized from somewhere behind the bar. He was sitting in a chair that someone had placed specifically for him in the one spot in the room with the clearest sightline to the door, so that when things started moving, he wouldn't feel trapped. Marcus had not asked for any of this. He didn't have to. This was what the Brotherhood did when it was being what it was supposed to be, and 23 years of riding and grieving and dragging each other through things that would have broken smaller groups of people had calibrated every man in the room to recognize a moment that required it. Marcus stood to the side with his phone to his ear, talking to a man named Vic Ruiz, who ran the chapter's road captain operations, and had an almost supernatural knowledge of the highway routes out of Sturgis. While he talked, he watched Noah. The boy was sitting with both hands wrapped around the paper cup, not drinking from it, just holding it. His eyes were on the door. That image, the boy's eyes on the door, not blinking, not willing to look away from the last place he'd seen the world that contained his mother, went somewhere into Marcus's chest and lodged there like a piece of shrapnel. He knew what it felt like to watch a door and will the right thing to come through it. He knew what it felt like when the wrong thing came through instead. He pushed that down. He had been pushing it down for 7 years. He was practiced. Vic, he said into the phone, get the bikes ready. All of them. We're riding in 5 minutes. There was a pause on the other end. Then Vic said, how many? Marcus looked at the room, at the faces, at the collective posture of 600 people who had already made up their minds. All of them, Marcus said. He ended the call and walked back to Noah. The boy looked up at him. The hot chocolate was still untouched. Are they coming? Noah asked. My brother's already at your mom's car. Marcus crouched again, same knee, same level. And in about 4 minutes, every motorcycle in this parking lot is going to be on that highway. Noah processed this. His jaw tightened in a way that was almost adult. The jaw set of someone trying to hold a feeling in a container that wasn't quite big enough. She was talking to me, the boy said. She said she felt dizzy. She told me to get her kit from the bag in the back, and I got it, and when I turned around, she was just... He stopped. The container held barely. She told me before the trip. She told me if she ever got like that, get help fast. Don't wait. Don't try to do it myself, just get help. She gave you good instructions, Marcus said. I didn't know where to go, there was nothing, just your lights. Marcus held the boy's gaze. 7 years of carrying something very heavy had left Marcus Kane with a face that many people found difficult to read, and that was mostly intentional. But in that moment, looking at this boy who had run a mile down a black highway because his mother had taught him that help was always worth running toward, something moved through Marcus's expression that the people close enough to see it would mention later with varying degrees of awkwardness, because it was not the kind of thing you expected to see on a face like that. "You did exactly right," Marcus said. "You did everything exactly right." He stood. He put on his cut properly, both hands, straightening it across the shoulders the way a man does when he is about to go somewhere that matters. "You're coming with me," he told Noah. "You're going to sit behind me on the bike and hold on, and we're going to find your mom. You've done the hard part already, son. You ran through the dark alone and you asked for help. Everything from here is ours." Noah set down the paper cup. He stood up. He was so small. Standing next to Marcus Kane in that bar, with the noise beginning to filter back in as engines started outside and men moved with purpose through the room, he was so small it was almost hard to look at directly. But he straightened his spine, and he lifted his chin, and he followed Marcus toward the door without looking back. Outside, the night air hit them both, cold, carrying that particular emptiness of the South Dakota dark, and the parking lot had transformed into something that, if you were watching from a distance, would have looked like a military staging area. Engines idling in rows, headlights pointed toward the highway exit, riders in formation with the particular quiet efficiency of people who knew exactly what this was. The sound was immense and layered, hundreds of distinct machines creating a chord that was not quite music, but was not quite not either. It pressed against the skin. It was physical. Noah stood at the edge of the parking lot and looked at it all and said nothing. His face was illuminated in the sweeping orange of 400 headlights, and Marcus, standing beside him, was close enough to see the boy's breath come out in a thin cloud in the cold air, short and fast, adrenaline still burning through the small body. Marcus's Harley was at the front of the first row, the president's position, which he had not asked for, but which was simply how the Brotherhood organized itself when it moved. He walked to it, swung a leg over, and looked back at Noah. "You ever been on a motorcycle?" Noah shook his head. "Hold on to my jacket, don't let go, tuck your feet here." He showed him. "When I lean, you lean with me. Don't fight it, go with it." The boy climbed up behind him with a carefulness that spoke of someone trying very hard to follow instructions precisely. His hands found the back of Marcus's cut and held on. Small hands, cold already. Marcus felt the weight of the boy behind him. Light, almost nothing compared to what the Harley could carry. And something about that specific physical sensation, the smallness of the weight, the tightness of the grip, moved through him in a way he had not been moved in a very long time. He reached down and started the engine. The sound folded into the sound of everything around them, and the convoy began to move, and the highway opened up ahead of them, like a dark throat. And somewhere out there in the cold, a woman named Elena Brooks was alone in a car that had stopped, unconscious, not knowing that an 8-year-old boy had done the impossible thing she had raised him to do. Marcus opened the throttle. The wind came at them hard and cold, and the highway unrolled beneath the lights. And Noah, hands locked onto the back of the cut, chin pressed against Marcus's shoulder, felt something that he would not be able to name for years. Not safety exactly, because his mother was still out there and his mother was still not awake. Not comfort. Something older than either of those words. Something that felt, despite everything, like the world was still holding him. He didn't know that Marcus Kane was feeling something too. Something he had buried next to his son in a cemetery in Colorado 7 years ago and had not touched since. He didn't know yet what it was going to cost both of them before this night was over. But the highway was there, the lights were moving. And Derek Sloan was already at the car, his kit open, his hands working in the dark. And what he had just found, kneeling on that cold asphalt beside Elena Brooks's unconscious body, had put an expression on his face that the other riders arriving around him would not forget. Because something was very wrong, something beyond diabetic shock, something that no one in that parking lot had accounted for. And Marcus Kane, thundering down the highway at the head of 600 motorcycles with a boy's cold hands gripping his back, had no idea yet what was waiting for him at the end of that road. The highway was a black ribbon pulled tight across the prairie, and the convoy hit it like a fist. Marcus had ridden fast before. He had ridden in rain and ice, and once in a dust storm in New Mexico that had reduced visibility to about 12 feet, and still he had kept moving because stopping had felt like a worse kind of danger than whatever was ahead. But there was something about riding with 600 machines behind you, all of them pushing the same dark air, all of them pointed at the same point on the horizon, that produced a sensation in the chest that had no clean name. It wasn't power exactly. It was more like inevitability, like being part of something that had already decided its own outcome and just needed the road to confirm it. Noah's hands were still locked on the back of his cut. The boy hadn't made a sound since they left the parking lot. Not a word, not a cry, just that small, relentless grip and the occasional shift of weight when Marcus leaned into a curve. Marcus could feel the boy's forehead pressed against his shoulder blade, not watching the road but turned inward, dealing with something privately the way children sometimes do when the situation is too large for the available words. Marcus recognized that posture. He had worn it himself once, sitting in a hospital waiting room in Colorado, trying to be in his own body while the world outside continued at full speed without his permission. The radio crackled at his hip. Derek's voice came through with the flat, clipped economy of a man working and talking at the same time. "I'm at the vehicle. Silver Subaru, shoulder of Route 19, about 0.8 miles from the bar. Female, mid-30s, unconscious but breathing. Pulse is present but irregular. I've got her kit. She's type 1. The insulin pen is empty, and her glucose tabs are open in the passenger seat. Looks like she tried to self-administer before she lost consciousness and didn't get enough in." A pause. 1 second, 2. "Marcus, I need you to know she's been out for a while. The car's cold. She's been out longer than the kid thought." Marcus processed this without changing his speed. "How long?" "Hard to say without equipment, but the boy ran a mile in the cold, bought time talking to people who didn't help him, and then made it to us. I'd estimate she's been down 40 minutes minimum, maybe closer to an hour." The number went through Marcus's chest like a current. 40 minutes. An hour. In diabetic emergencies that involved extended unconsciousness, the margin between recoverable and not recoverable was not generous. Derek knew that math better than anyone. "I need glucose, IV dextrose, ideally. I've got oral gel, but she's not swallowing reliably, and I can't risk aspiration." Another pause. "I've already called the county dispatcher. EMS is coming from Rapid City, 35 minutes out." 35 minutes. Marcus did not say what he was thinking, which was that 35 minutes was 35 minutes too long. He said, "We're 4 minutes out. Keep her stable." He clicked off and opened the throttle another notch, and the Harley surged forward, and behind him, he felt Noah's grip tighten without the boy making a sound. The boy knew. On some level, from Derek's tone coming through that radio, on some level the boy knew it was worse than they'd told him. Children always know. They pick it up from the way adults stop completing sentences, from the particular quality of silence that follows certain kinds of information. Noah's hands didn't shake. They just held on harder, and Marcus felt that additional pressure against his back, and it went into the same place the other things had gone tonight, that accumulating weight in the chest that he was managing by not looking at it directly. He focused on the road. The headlights of the convoy behind him filled his mirrors in a column of white that stretched back so far it disappeared around the curve of the earth. From above, and Marcus had seen aerial footage of Brotherhood convoys before, though he rarely admitted to the complicated feeling it produced in him. It would have looked like a river of light moving through the dark. From the ground, from the cab of one of the 3 sheriff's patrol vehicles that had materialized alongside the convoy within the first mile, it looked like exactly what it was. 600 people moving with singular purpose at a speed that technically exceeded the posted limit, but that no reasonable highway patrolman was going to challenge tonight. The patrol vehicles didn't turn on their sirens. They didn't attempt to stop. They matched speed and fell into flanking positions with the kind of wordless professional recognition that said, "We see what this is. We are not going to be what slows it down." Marcus noted this and filed it without sentiment. He had a complicated history with law enforcement. Most of the Brotherhood did, simply by virtue of what they looked like and where they moved. But tonight was not a night for that particular history. Tonight had its own rules. He saw the car from 300 yards out. The hazard lights were still going, orange pulses in the dark, slow and mechanical, indifferent to the emergency they were signaling. The Subaru was pulled halfway onto the shoulder, the front passenger wheel in the gravel, the driver's side door hanging open the way it does when someone has left in a hurry or fallen against it. Derek's bike was parked 30 feet back, his headlight aimed at the vehicle to give himself working light, and Derek himself was crouched at the open driver's door in a posture that Marcus recognized from a long time ago. The posture of someone doing everything right and still watching the clock. Marcus pulled in and dismounted in one motion. He turned to Noah and helped the boy down, kept a hand on his shoulder, and walked him toward the car at a measured pace, fast enough to matter, slow enough to keep the boy from bolting into something he wasn't prepared for. Behind them, the convoy was pulling off in a disciplined spread, machines cutting power and going to park on both sides of the highway, headlights staying on to build the collective illumination that now lit the scene in a cold, flat, comprehensive glow. Derek looked up when Marcus got close. His expression was the particular neutrality of a trained medic managing his own alarm. His hands were moving with steady competence. Oxygen mask, glucose gel applied carefully to Elena's gum line, 2 fingers pressed to her wrist. And the neutrality in his face was not indifference. It was discipline. Marcus knew the difference because he'd seen what Derek's face looked like when the discipline slipped, and that was a memory he carried carefully. "She's stable," Derek said, which Marcus knew meant she's alive and I'm keeping her that way, and we need more than I have. Noah made a sound that was not a word. He moved toward the car and Marcus let him go the last few feet alone, because some things require that a child be allowed to do them without a large hand on their shoulder making it easier, because making it easier is not always what serves someone. The boy crouched beside his mother. Elena Brooks was in her mid-30s, dark hair, a face that even in unconsciousness retained the structural quality of someone who had been through some version of a long day many days in a row. She was wearing a fleece pullover and jeans, and one of her shoes had come half off, the way shoes do when a person's body goes slack suddenly. Noah put his hand on her arm, not shaking it, just placing it there. And the quality of that touch, a child's hand finding a parent's arm in the dark, was something that several of the Brotherhood members who had pulled up close enough to see it would discuss later in ways that were not comfortable for any of them. "Mom," Noah said. Quiet. Not a plea exactly. More like a statement of presence. "I'm here. I found them. I did what you said." Derek looked at Marcus over the boy's head. A look that communicated several things simultaneously. The primary one being, we're going to need that ambulance and we're going to need it to move. Marcus stepped back and put his radio to his mouth. "Vic, what's the EMS status?" Vic Ruiz's voice came back immediate. "Dispatcher says 31 minutes. I pushed back. Explain this situation." "Push harder." "Already sent 2 of ours ahead on the highway to create a clear corridor. They're coordinating with the patrols." This was what Vic was for. Not just road captain logistics. The ability to think in multiple lanes at once. To move information and people and resources the way a good general moved units, without needing to be asked, and without needing to be thanked. Marcus had recruited Vic specifically because of this capacity, and watching it operate smoothly in situations like this one always produced in Marcus a complicated feeling that was adjacent to gratitude but cut with something else. Something that had to do with his awareness that organizations like theirs operated best in crises, and sometimes found peacetime genuinely difficult. He walked back to where Derek was working and crouched beside him. "What aren't you saying in front of the boy?" Derek's jaw tightened. His hands kept moving. "Her glucose is critically low. The gel is going to help, but not fast enough. If she doesn't get IV dextrose in the next 20 minutes, there's risk of..." He stopped. Glanced at Noah, who was still holding his mother's arm with both hands now. "Extended consequences." Extended consequences was a phrase Derek had developed over the years to communicate the unspeakable in front of people who didn't need to be destroyed by the specific word. Marcus had heard him use it 3 times before. He had never once liked hearing it. "Tell me what you need." "What I need is in an ambulance that's 31 minutes away." Derek's voice was level, but there was something in it. Something that only someone who had ridden with him for 6 years would hear. The thing that sounds like calm when it is actually a man holding a very specific and very personal fear in a very tight grip. "What I can do with what I have, I'm doing." Marcus stood. He turned away from the car and walked far enough away that his voice wouldn't carry, and he took out his phone and called a number he hadn't called in 3 years. The phone rang 4 times. A man answered with a voice that sounded like it had been asleep and didn't appreciate the interruption. "This is Kane," Marcus said. "I need a favor." A pause. "It's 11:30. "I know what time it is. There's a woman on Route 19. about a mile south of the Thunder Road. She's diabetic, she's been unconscious for close to an hour, and the EMS from Rapid City is 30-plus minutes out. I need to know if there's anyone closer, anyone private, anyone with IV capability. Another pause. Longer. The sound of movement, of someone sitting up in a bed somewhere, reassessing the call they'd just answered. "Hang on," the voice said. Marcus stood on the shoulder of the highway with the cold pressing in from all sides and the sound of 600 idling engines behind him, a sound that had always meant something to him. And tonight meant something different, something heavier, something that had to do with the fact that all that power and all that loyalty was at this moment organized entirely around a boy's cold hands and a woman's uneven heartbeat. And there was a specific limit to what any of it could do, and that limit was a number in minutes that Marcus did not have. Behind him, he heard a voice he didn't expect. "What's the holdup?" He turned. Kelly, one of the three prospects, 26 years old, wound too tight, the one Marcus had been reserving judgment on, was standing 10 feet away. He had his hands in his jacket pockets and his jaw set in a way that read confrontational until you looked at his eyes and found something else there. "Get back with the group," Marcus said. "I'm EMT certified," Kelly said. 3 years with a county service in Nebraska before I came out here. I heard what Derek said about IV dextrose." He paused. "One beat. I carry a kit on my bike." The silence that followed lasted approximately 2 seconds and contained a specific quality that Marcus would later be unable to accurately describe. He looked at Kelly, at the wound-too-tight posture, the set jaw, the eyes that were not what the jaw suggested, and he made a decision that required revising something he had believed 6 minutes ago. "Get your kit," Marcus said. Kelly was already moving. Derek looked up when Kelly arrived beside him, kit in hand. There was a moment, a single professional moment of two trained people looking at each other over a patient and making rapid assessments of whether to trust. And then Derek made a sound that was not quite a word and nodded, and Kelly opened his kit, and what happened next was competent and fast and entirely wordless, in the way that emergency medicine is when it is being practiced by people who have earned the right to do it without narrating themselves. Marcus watched from 5 feet back. Noah had moved to allow them room but had not gone far. He was sitting on the gravel of the shoulder with his back against the car's rear tire, close enough to touch his mother if he needed to, far enough to not be in the way. And he was watching Derek and Kelly with an expression that was not hope exactly, but was the thing that precedes hope when you've been through enough to not trust the feeling until it's confirmed. 20 feet away, Vic Ruiz appeared at Marcus's elbow. Vic was 51, compact, a scar on his chin from a knife fight in Albuquerque in 1998 that he had never fully explained, and the particular stillness of someone who had learned that stillness was itself a form of power. "We have a problem," Vic said. Marcus looked at him. "Watts is here." The name landed the way Vic had known it would. Marcus's face did not change. The discipline was too old for that. But something in his posture shifted, a degree of recalibration that would have been invisible to most people and was entirely legible to Vic. Raymond Watts was the national treasurer of the Iron Covenant. He was also the man who had been quietly, persistently, and thus far unsuccessfully attempting to change the Brotherhood's orientation for the last 3 years, to take what the Iron Covenant was and make it into something that served a different set of interests. Interests that were not about showing up on dark highways at midnight for strangers who needed help. Interests that were about revenue, territory, and the kind of influence that required its practitioners to stop being emotionally invested in the people they encountered. He was also, technically, Marcus's superior within the Brotherhood's national structure. "Where?" Marcus said. "Parked at the back of the convoy. He was at the rally. He heard the dispatch on the club channel." Vic's voice was flat. "He's not alone. He brought 4 of his guys from the Denver chapter." Marcus processed this. The timing was not accidental. It never was with Watts. The man had an instinct for appearing when an event could be interpreted in multiple ways, when the narrative of what was happening was still being written, and a particular framing could attach itself to the outcome and shape how it was remembered. "He'll wait," Marcus said. "He's already told 2 of the prospects that the National Board has concerns about liability exposure from this kind of response. Unauthorized medical intervention, unlicensed." "Vic." Marcus's voice was very quiet. Vic stopped. "She needs 15 more minutes. Derek and Kelly need 15 minutes to stabilize her before the EMS arrives. After that, I'll talk to Watts. But right now, he glanced toward the car, toward Noah's small silhouette against the tire. Right now, that is the only thing that matters. Vic held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, once, and turned back toward the convoy. Marcus went back to the car. He went, and he sat down on the gravel beside Noah, which was not a thing he did easily or naturally. Marcus Kane had not sat on cold ground next to a frightened child in 7 years, had in fact organized a considerable portion of his life around not being in situations that required it, and he sat there without saying anything while Derek and Kelly worked. The boy spoke first. "She has episodes sometimes," Noah said. His voice was steady in the way that children's voices are steady when they are reporting facts that contain enormous feelings, because reporting the facts is safer than letting the feelings be present without that container. "She knows it can happen. She's really careful. She always has her kit. She always checks before we go anywhere." He paused. "We were supposed to stop in Rapid City, but she said she felt okay. She said she felt okay." Marcus said, "She trusted herself." "She's usually right. People who know their own bodies usually are." He picked up a small piece of gravel and turned it in his fingers. "What's in Montana?" A small hesitation. "My aunt's house. My mom got a job there." "A clinic." Another pause. "She's a vet nurse. She takes care of animals." "Good work." "She's good at it. She's really good at it." The last sentence carried something in it that was not just information. It was the testimony of a boy who had watched a parent be excellent at something and understood that excellence as a form of love that the parent directed outward into the world. "We've been driving for 2 days. We left our old house in Ohio." "Long drive." "We stopped at Waldrug." A beat. Mom laughed at all the signs. Marcus looked at the boy. In the collective glow of the headlights, all those headlights aimed at this spot from this convoy that had arrived from the dark, Noah's face was lit in a way that was almost overexposed, too clear, every detail present. The dried tear track on one cheek, the mud on the knee, the way he was sitting with his weight slightly forward, ready to move, not committing to stillness because stillness felt like giving up. Marcus said, "She sounds like someone who laughs at the right things." Noah almost smiled. "She laughs at everything. It's embarrassing sometimes." The almost smile faded. "I want her to be embarrassing again." Marcus said nothing. He had nothing to say to that. He just stayed where he was, on the cold gravel, and he let the boy have the silence around that sentence, because some sentences need room, and the worst thing you can do is fill that room before the person is done with it. Derek's voice came from inside the car. "Glucose is rising. She's responding." Marcus felt something in his shoulders release that he hadn't known he was holding. Noah made a sound, small, one syllable, the sound of something that has been held very tightly for a very long time beginning, very carefully, to relax. "She's not awake yet," Derek said, "but she's going the right direction. Kelly?" A pause that contained something that sounded almost like surprise. "Good work." Kelly, from the other side of the car, said nothing, just kept working. The EMS arrived 18 minutes later, not 31, because Vic's riders had done exactly what they were deployed to do, and the 2 patrol units on the flanks had managed the corridor with a focused efficiency that had apparently impressed the EMS crew enough that they mentioned it when they arrived. The ambulance pulled in at a careful speed and 2 paramedics got out moving fast, and they found Elena Brooks with an established line, stabilizing vitals, and a former Army medic who could brief them concisely and completely on everything they'd done and why. The senior paramedic, a woman named Aldridge, who had been working emergency medicine for 15 years and had thus developed a careful professional detachment about most things, looked at the scene and said plainly, "Who are all these people?" Derek said, "Friends of the family." Aldridge looked at the convoy, at the 600 motorcycles parked on both shoulders of the highway in a corridor that extended back a quarter mile, at the riders standing quietly in the cold, not close enough to interfere but present in a way that was total and unmistakable. "Friends," she said. "Friends," Derek confirmed. She looked back at him. Then she did the thing Marcus had always respected competent people for doing. She let it go and focused on her patient. They loaded Elena into the ambulance with the particular organized speed of people who have done it many times, and know that speed serves the patient and ceremony does not. Noah watched from 10 feet back with Marcus's hand on his shoulder, and when the ambulance doors closed, the boy leaned his weight into that hand slightly. Not much, barely perceptible, and Marcus applied a corresponding resistance, because that is what you do when someone leans into you in the dark. The ambulance pulled away. Lights. Movement. The red of the rear lights dwindling down the highway. Noah watched until they were out of sight. Then he turned and looked up at Marcus with an expression that was exhausted and fragile and trying not to be either. "Can we follow?" he asked. "That's exactly what we're going to do," Marcus said. And that was the moment Raymond Watts stepped out of the crowd. He was 61, silver-haired, the kind of heavyset that looked deliberate rather than careless. And he wore his cut with the careful presentation of someone to whom presentation had always been a strategy. He had 4 men behind him, all Denver chapter, all larger than they needed to be. And he walked toward Marcus with the measured pace of someone who had planned this approach. "Kane," he said. The name landed in the open air between them. Around them, the brotherhood had gone very still. Not the organized stillness of professional response. This was the different stillness of a group that had suddenly become an audience. Several people within earshot had not moved. Several people farther away had slowly turned. Marcus looked at Watts. He said nothing. "That was impressive," Watts said. He looked at the stretch of highway where the ambulance had been. "Genuinely. But you know what I'm going to say. I know what you're going to try to say." Watts's expression shifted. Not much, just a degree. The micro-adjustment of someone recalibrating for a less cooperative interlocutor than they'd anticipated. "The National Board has been trying to reach you for 3 weeks. About the direction of things. About what the Iron Covenant is and isn't in a position to be doing." He paused. "We just deployed 600 members onto a federal highway for a civilian medical emergency, without authorization from the national structure, without liability review, without—" "There was a child," Marcus said. The sentence was short. The sentence was complete. "I understand that," Watts said, and his voice had a quality that Marcus had come to recognize as Watts's most dangerous register. Not aggressive, not confrontational, but the tone of someone who has decided that the situation requires them to be reasonable while getting what they want. "And I'm not saying the impulse was wrong. I'm saying the Brotherhood is not a first responder organization. That is not what we are chartered to do. It's not what we're insured to do. And frankly, the optics of 600 bikers surrounding a woman in medical distress are not necessarily—" "Watts!" Marcus's voice had changed. It was still quiet, but the quality of the quiet had changed in a way that stopped the other man mid-sentence. "The toast tonight," Marcus said. "You were there?" Watts said nothing. "I was going to talk about loyalty, about what it costs to be the kind of people who show up, about what we owe each other and why we owe it." Marcus looked at the man directly. Not aggressively, not with the anticipatory lean of someone who is about to escalate, just directly, with the full weight of someone who has earned the right to look at someone else without blinking. "Everything I was going to say tonight, we just lived it, on that highway, in the dark, with a boy who ran a mile to find us because we were the only lights there were." A long silence. "That's a good story," Watts said. "I mean that. It's a genuinely good story. But stories don't answer the National Board's questions, and the National Board's questions need to be answered, Marcus, within the next 30 days or what, Raymond?" The name. Not Watts. Raymond. It landed differently, and everyone in earshot felt it land differently. Watts's jaw tightened. "Or the board convenes a review of the Sturgis chapter's operational charter, and my recommendation to that review will reflect the events of tonight and what I observed in terms of command judgment." The word command landed with its full weight. Noah, who had been standing quietly beside Marcus through all of this, looked up at Marcus with a face that had acquired a new expression over the last 60 seconds. Not fear, not confusion, but the careful watchfulness of a child who has learned, through whatever experiences had shaped him, to read the temperature of the space between adults. Marcus looked down at the boy. Then he looked back at Watts. "Go back to Denver, Raymond," Marcus said. "Go back to Denver and write whatever you need to write, and the board can review whatever they want to review." He paused. "But this conversation is over because I have a child who needs to get to the hospital where his mother is, and you are what's between him and the vehicle right now." Something moved through the assembled crowd. Not a sound, not a movement, but something more like a shift in pressure. the quality of 600 people's attention tightening simultaneously. Watts looked at Marcus for a long moment. He looked at Noah. He looked at the crowd. He made the calculation that very smart men make when they recognize that the available moves have narrowed to one. He stepped aside. Marcus put his hand back on Noah's shoulder and they walked toward the bikes. And Marcus didn't look back. But he heard, from somewhere in the group around Watts, one of the Denver riders say something quietly to another, something he wasn't supposed to hear. And what he caught was not the whole sentence, just a piece of it. Just enough. The boy's father. He stopped walking. He turned slowly and looked back at the cluster of Denver riders standing near Watts. Nobody met his eye. Nobody repeated anything. The phrase hung in the cold air without a speaker. Marcus stood very still on the shoulder of the highway for a moment. Then he turned back around and kept walking, and his face was the face of someone who has just heard something they need more of, and know that pushing for more right now will close the door. Noah was looking up at him again. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Marcus said. The word came out more carefully than it should have. He put Noah on the bike and mounted in front of him and started the engine and felt the boy's hands come back to his cut, back to that same grip, cold and small and reliable in a way that Marcus was not prepared for, and he pulled out onto the highway and he kept his eyes on the road. But inside his chest, something had changed. The boy's father. What about the boy's father? Elena Brooks was driving to Montana alone with her son. No mention of a father, no second car, no phone calls from anyone asking after them. A recently divorced woman, a child, a breakdown on a lonely highway at night. Were they running from something? Was there a reason Elena Brooks had chosen a back road through South Dakota in the dark instead of the interstate? Was there someone behind them who Marcus and the Brotherhood, in their certainty about what this situation was, had not thought to consider? The hospital lights appeared on the horizon, and Marcus rode toward them with the boy at his back, and 600 machines behind him, and a question in his mind that was beginning to feel, with every mile, less like a curiosity and more like a warning. This is a work of complete fiction created for entertainment purposes only. All characters, locations, motorcycle clubs, and events are entirely fictional. Part 3, the hospital parking lot, was full of motorcycles. Not chaotically. The Brotherhood didn't do anything chaotically when it had the space to choose otherwise. They had arranged themselves in rows along the far edge of the lot, away from the ambulance bay, away from the entrance, with the particular spatial intelligence of people who understood that their presence was already a statement, and that the statement didn't need to be amplified by positioning. Engines off, headlights off, just the machines and the men and the cold, and the distant sound of the hospital's ventilation system pushing warm air into the South Dakota night. Marcus walked Noah through the emergency entrance at 12:47 in the morning. The automatic doors opened and the warmth hit them both. That specific hospital warmth, overheated and antiseptic, the warmth of a building that has been trying too hard against the cold for too long. Noah stopped just inside the threshold and blinked against the fluorescent light. He had been in the dark for hours. The light was almost aggressive. The triage desk was staffed by a nurse named Paulson, 40-something, tired in the specific way of someone in the 7th hour of a 12-hour shift, with the efficient compassion of someone who had trained themselves to care consistently without burning through their reserves too fast. She looked at the two of them, a large, road-worn man in a leather cut with iron gray in his beard, and a small boy with mud on his knee and dried salt on his face from crying that had stopped so long ago he'd forgotten it happened. "Elena Brooks," Marcus said. "She came in by ambulance. Diabetic emergency." Paulson's fingers moved on her keyboard. "You family?" "He is," Marcus said, and put his hand briefly on Noah's shoulder. "I'm with him." Paulson looked at Noah. Something in her expression adjusted, the professional warmth calibrating to accommodate a child alone at midnight. "She's been taken to treatment room 3. The doctor will come out to speak with family when they have an update." She looked at Noah directly. "Your mom is being taken care of, okay? You did the right thing, getting help." Noah nodded. He had been nodding at adult sane versions of this for the last 2 hours, and each time he nodded, it was with the same quality, not dismissive, not resentful, but the nod of someone who is keeping all the words in a container they will open later when they have more capacity. Marcus guided him to the waiting area. Plastic chairs, a low table with magazines from 4 months ago, A mounted television playing a news channel with the sound off and the captions running. Two other people in the room, an elderly man with his hands folded, and a teenage girl asleep across three chairs with a jacket over her face. Noah sat. Marcus sat beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed their single note. The caption on the television moved through a story about a weather system coming in from the northwest. Through the window, Marcus could see the edge of the parking lot where the Brotherhood was stationed. Just shapes in the dark, barely visible, but present. "You called her Mom," Marcus said after a while. "When you were at the car?" "Yeah." Noah looked at his hands. "She know you were going to say that?" A pause. Almost a smile. "She would have liked it." Marcus said nothing. "She's been trying to get me to stop calling her Elena for about 2 years," Noah said. "I kept saying I would, and then not doing it." He rubbed the back of his hand across his nose. "I'm going to do it now." The sentence sat between them with all its weight, and Marcus let it sit there, the way he'd let the other sentences sit. And he thought about the specific cruelty of the fact that it sometimes takes a catastrophe to move a person from what they meant to do to what they actually do. He thought about all the things he had meant to do before Colorado. Before the hospital in Colorado that looked a lot like this one, with the same lights and the same smell and the same quality of waiting. He pushed it back. Derek came through the entrance doors at 12:58, Kelly 2 steps behind him. Derek had blood on his jacket cuff. Not much, a smear from the IV work on the highway, and he'd unzipped his cut halfway in the warmth of the building. He spotted Marcus and crossed the waiting room with the economical stride of someone who is managing their body's exhaustion by moving it through tasks rather than acknowledging it. He sat down across from Marcus and Noah. He looked at the boy first. "She's a fighter," Derek said. "You know that already, I think." Noah looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because of how hard her body was still working when I got there. Some people, when the system goes down, they just go quiet. She hadn't gone quiet, she was fighting it." He leaned forward, forearms on knees, the posture of a man talking to a child seriously without talking down. "The doctors are going to get her stable tonight. In the morning, she's going to wake up, and the first thing she's going to want is to know you're okay." "I'm okay," Noah said. "You're going to want to be the one to tell her that, so you should probably sleep." Derek looked around the waiting room. "As much as anyone sleeps in one of these places." Noah looked at Marcus. Then he looked at the chair next to him, pulled his knees up to his chest, and leaned his side against the plastic armrest. It was not a comfortable position. He didn't seem to notice. His eyes closed with the sudden completeness of total exhaustion, the way children's eyes close when the body finally overrides whatever the mind has been using to keep them open. Marcus watched this for a moment. Then he stood and moved to stand near the window, and Derek followed. "What aren't you saying?" Marcus said. His voice was very low. A few feet away, the boy's breathing had already slowed. Derek kept his eyes on the lot outside. "She had bruising," he said, "on her left forearm. Older bruising, not tonight, finger width, in a pattern." A pause. "I've seen that pattern before." Marcus was still. "I didn't say anything because there was no point saying it in front of the kid and no point saying it on the highway when keeping her alive was the only thing that mattered." Derek turned his head slightly. "But I'm saying it now because I think it matters to what happens next. Someone put hands on her. Not recently enough to be fresh, but recent enough to still be visible." Derek's voice was flat in the way that Derek's voice went flat when he was managing a specific and personal anger with professional overlay. "She packed a car and she drove out of Ohio with her kid in the middle of a week, not a weekend. She took a back road instead of the interstate." "Vic ran the plates," Kelly said. He had been standing behind Derek, quiet enough that Marcus had half forgotten he was there. Both men looked at him. He met the looks without flinching. "While you were with the kid on the highway, Vic ran the plates because he runs the plates on any unknown vehicle the Brotherhood gets involved with. Standard protocol." "And," Marcus said, "the car is registered to a Daniel Brooks, not Elena Brooks, Daniel Brooks. Current address, Columbus, Ohio." The name landed clean and hard in the warm air of the waiting room. Marcus looked at the sleeping boy. Then he looked back at Kelly. "How long ago did Vic pull that?" "About 90 minutes. He was going to tell you, but..." Kelly's jaw worked briefly. Watts showed up, and then the ambulance, and there wasn't a clean moment. Why are you telling me this instead of Vic? Kelly met his gaze directly. Because Vic is outside dealing with Watts, who has been talking to the Denver writers for the last 40 minutes, and because I thought you needed to know this right now and not in the sequence of other things competing for your attention. A pause. One beat. Sir? The word was not sycophantic. It was the word of someone who had decided where the line was and was being precise about which side of it they were standing on. Marcus held the look for 2 seconds. Then he turned to Derek. Watts has been talking to Denver for 40 minutes. I know, Derek said. What is he saying? Nothing he'd say to your face, but the Denver guys have been on their phones, and one of the prospects overheard a name. Derek's eyes returned to the window. Hargrove. Marcus went very still. The name was not a Brotherhood name. The name was not from any chapter Marcus knew. But it was a name he had heard before, 3 years ago, in a meeting in Denver that had been described to him as a strategy session and had felt, from the first 10 minutes, like something else. A name attached to a kind of operation that the Iron Covenant, under the founding charter that Marcus had helped write, was specifically and explicitly prohibited from engaging with. Why, Marcus said, is Watts saying that name in a hospital parking lot at 1 in the morning? Derek said nothing. He didn't have to. The silence itself was the answer, or the beginning of one. The shape of something that had not yet fully declared itself, but whose outline, in the accumulated dark of the last 3 hours, was starting to become clear. Marcus walked outside. The cold received him immediately, that specific South Dakota cold that carries moisture in it, the leading edge of whatever the weather system on the muted television had been moving toward. The air had changed while they were inside. There was a smell to it now. Rain coming. Not close, but coming. He found Vic at the edge of the lot, standing with his back to the hospital and his face toward the street. The Denver riders were 30 yards away in a cluster, too far to hear clearly, not far enough to ignore. Watts was not visible, which meant Watts was either in a vehicle or had stepped away, and neither option was comfortable. Talk, Marcus said. Vic turned. His face in the parking lot light was the face of someone who has been doing the math on a problem and has arrived at a number they don't like. Hargrove Logistics, he said. That's the name the Denver boys have been throwing around. The prospect who overheard it, Tomas, the kid from Billings, he said one of the Denver guys used the phrase, the woman, not the patient, not the civilian. The woman. Like they knew who she was before tonight. The cold went deeper than the temperature could account for. Pull everything you have on Daniel Brooks, Marcus said. Full background. Employer, associates, record, everything. Already started. Vic's hand was on his phone. But Marcus, if Hargrove Logistics is what I think it is, if it's connected to what went down in the Denver chapter last year, the thing they wouldn't let the National Board investigate, then Watts isn't here because of liability concerns, Marcus said. No, Vic said. He's not. The rain started. Not dramatically, just the first few drops, the tentative advance scouting of what the clouds were building toward. It tapped on the chrome of the parked machines in the lot with a sound like fingers on a table. Several riders turned their faces up. Several others started moving toward their bikes. Marcus stood in the first drops of rain and thought about the phrase the woman, about the way it had been used according to Tomas, about the specific grammar of that usage, not identifying someone new, but referencing someone already known. He thought about Daniel Brooks and a car registered in Daniel Brooks's name being driven away from Ohio in the middle of the week. He thought about finger-width bruising on a forearm. He thought about the thing one of the Denver riders had said on the highway. The boy's father. Not that boy's father. Not her kid's dad. The specific possessive. The boy's father. As if the speaker knew the specific boy they were discussing, as if the boy's father was a reference point rather than a generic relational category. Vic, Marcus said. When Thomas overheard them, was Watts in that conversation? According to Thomas, Watts was the one who said Hargrove Logistics. Marcus turned and walked back toward the hospital entrance. I was 3 steps from the door when it opened from the inside, and a man came out who was not a Brotherhood member and was not hospital staff, and was not anyone Marcus had expected to see tonight. He was 45, maybe 48. Thick through the neck and shoulders with the specific thickness of a man who had been doing some kind of physical work for decades, and wore it as density rather than definition. He was wearing a canvas jacket, clean jeans, work boots that were not Sturgis boots, not the decorated, curated footwear of someone at a rally, but the actual function boots of someone who wore them to a job site. His face was ordinary. That was the thing that registered first, the studied, practiced ordinariness of it. Nothing remarkable. Nothing you would look at twice. The face of someone who had learned to be unremarkable as a professional discipline. He stopped when he saw Marcus. He didn't flinch. He didn't recalibrate. He just stopped, with the specific stillness of someone who had prepared for multiple versions of how this moment could unfold and was now selecting between them. "Mr. Kane," he said. Marcus's hand did not move toward anything. He stood at his full height, which was considerable, and he looked at the man with the look that had made prospects reconsider their life choices and that had not significantly changed in the 9 years since he'd started using it. "You're going to tell me who you are," Marcus said, "and you're going to do it in the next 4 seconds. The man said, "My name is Reeves. I work for an organization that has a significant interest in the woman currently being treated inside this hospital." "An interest," Marcus said. "She's a material witness," Reeves said, "in an ongoing federal investigation. She has been under informal protective consideration for the last 6 weeks. We were aware of her travel route." He paused. One beat, the beat of someone choosing how much to put on the table. "We were not aware her medical condition was going to create a situation that required the involvement of—" He glanced past Marcus at the lot full of motorcycles. "This." The rain was falling steadily now, and it darkened the shoulders of both men's jackets, and collected in the grooves of the asphalt between them, and made the parking lot sound, faintly, like something breathing. "Federal," Marcus said. "Federal," Reeves confirmed. "Then show me something that says that." Reeves reached into his jacket with 2 fingers, slowly, with the deliberate care of someone reaching into their jacket in front of a man like Marcus Kane, who was clearly thinking about where the nearest large object was, and produced a credential case and opened it. Marcus looked at it for a long enough time to read it properly. He handed it back. "Elena Brooks is a witness," Marcus said. "To what?" "That's not something I can detail to you at—" "To what?" Marcus said again. The words were the same, but the quality of them was different, the difference between a question and a statement that is shaped like a question. Reeves looked at him. He made a calculation. "Money movement," he said. "Specifically, a network that has been operating through the logistics infrastructure of several companies, including one called Hargrove Logistics, which your organization has connections to that we have also been looking at." The parking lot went very quiet around those words. Not because anything physical changed. The rain kept falling, the machines kept sitting in their rows, but something in the air around Marcus changed the way air changes in the moment before a storm makes up its mind. "Say that again," Marcus said. "Hargrove Logistics has a documented connection to the Iron Covenant Motorcycle Brotherhood's financial structure," Reeves said. His voice was level and careful, and not unkind, in the way of someone delivering information they know to be damaging to the recipient, and who has decided that the decent thing is to be direct about it. "Not to the organization as a whole, to specific individuals within the national leadership. We've been building the evidentiary picture for 14 months. He paused. "Mr. Watts is among the individuals in question." Marcus stood in the rain. The specific quality of silence that followed was one that has a name in physics. The moment before a wave breaks, when all the energy has arrived at a single point and the water has nowhere to go but down. Every Brotherhood man in the parking lot was too far away to hear the conversation, but they could see Marcus standing in the rain talking to a stranger, and the particular quality of Marcus's posture, motionless in a way that was not still, rigid in a way that was not calm, communicated something that moved through the lot in a slow ripple, men straightening without knowing why, conversations stopping, hands coming away from jacket pockets. "Watts," Marcus said, "is the one who brought me to the Sturgis chapter 9 years ago." "I know," Reeves said. "He vouched for my patch. He sat across from me at the table and he said—" Marcus stopped. The muscle in his jaw worked once. He said the Brotherhood was the last honest institution in a country that had run out of them. Reeves said nothing. "And you're telling me he's been running money for Hargrove through the national accounts?" "For approximately 4 years," Reeves said. "We believe the arrangement began before he recruited you to the Sturgis chapter." "Yes." He held Marcus's gaze without looking away, which required some specific quality of nerve. We don't believe you have any knowledge of or involvement in it. That assessment is part of our existing record. The rain intensified slightly, the way it does when the leading edge of a real system arrives, and the tentative drops become committed ones. It fell on the lot, and on the machines, and on the shoulders of both men, and it ran down Marcus's face, and he didn't move to wipe it away. "Elena Brooks," Marcus said. "What does she know?" "Her ex-husband is Daniel Brooks. Daniel Brooks has been employed by Hargrove Logistics for 8 years. During that time, he has participated in the movement of significant funds that we believe originated from sources connected to the Brotherhood's compromised national accounts." Reeves tucked the credential case back inside his jacket. "Elena Brooks, during her marriage, became aware of certain financial documents that passed through the household. She retained copies when she left. Those copies are currently in our possession. Her testimony as to their provenance and authenticity is material to our case against both Brooks and the Hargrove organization." He paused. "And against the Brotherhood's compromised national leadership." Marcus said, "Daniel Brooks knows she has the documents. He is known for approximately 11 weeks. She left Ohio 6 weeks ago. We don't have confirmation that he is actively pursuing her, but the probability assessment is—" Reeves stopped. He looked past Marcus at the entrance to the hospital, and something changed in his face, the controlled professional neutrality, shifting for the first time into something less controlled. "Mr. Kane, where's the boy right now?" "Inside," Marcus said. "Waiting room." "Is he alone?" The cold went through Marcus like current. "He was sleeping," Marcus said, "and he was already turning, already moving, and he heard Reeves behind him say something urgent, and he hit the automatic door at a run and went through the warmth and the light and turned hard toward the waiting room and saw Derek standing in the hallway outside it with a face that—" The chair where Noah had been sleeping was empty. Derek said, "He was here 2 minutes ago. I stepped out to call Vic, and when I came back—" Marcus crossed the room in 4 steps and looked at the chair and at the space around it, and at the exit door at the far end of the corridor, the one that led to the east side of the building, the one that had a push bar from the inside and would open without a key card. The push bar door was drifting shut. Marcus hit it at full speed and came out into the side lot, into the rain, and there, 40 feet away, half lit by a single pole light in the sheeting dark, was Noah, standing very still. Standing very still because there was a man's hand on his shoulder. Not Watts. Not anyone Marcus had seen tonight. A new man. Heavy-set, damp jacket. The specific posture of someone who had arrived here with a purpose and found it. The man looked up when Marcus came through the door, and their eyes met, and in the half-second of that eye contact, Marcus read the situation with the clarity of someone who had been trained by years of exactly these moments. The hand too high on the shoulder, the angle of the boy's body away from the grip. The look on Noah's face that was not a child's face anymore, but the particular ancient expression of someone understanding for the first time that a threat is real. "Step away from the boy," Marcus said. His voice was not loud. His voice was the voice he used when the thing he was about to do was already decided, and the words were a formality. The man's hand tightened on Noah's shoulder. And Marcus Kane, who had spent 9 years believing the Brotherhood was the last honest institution in a country that had run out of them, and who had just learned that the man who told him so had been lying from the first day, walked forward through the rain toward the small boy and the man gripping his shoulder. And behind him he heard the east door open again and again and again. Derek, Kelly, Vic, and then the sound of boots, many boots, on wet asphalt, because 600 people in a parking lot have ears, and the door opening hard is a sound that travels, and the Brotherhood moved the way it moved when it understood the situation without needing it explained. The man looked past Marcus at what was coming. His hand released Noah's shoulder, and Noah ran, straight and fast, directly toward Marcus, and Marcus caught him and put the boy behind him in one motion and stood between Noah and the man in the rain, and in that moment, with the weight of the boy pressed against his back, and the cold water running down his face, and the sound of his Brotherhood arriving behind him, Marcus understood with complete and devastating clarity what the next hours were going to require of him. Watts had used the Brotherhood, had used it as infrastructure for something that would destroy it if it came to light. And it was coming to light tonight, here, in this parking lot, in this rain, in front of a child who had run a mile in the dark to find help, and had found instead the epicenter of something none of them had known they were standing in. There was no version of the next 36 hours that did not end with the Iron Covenant facing the thing it had never faced before. Not a rival club, not law enforcement, not a highway, or a storm, or a loss. Itself. And Marcus Kane, standing in the rain with a boy's hands at his back, had exactly one move available to him. One that would cost him everything he had built, and possibly everything he was. And he already knew he was going to make it. The man in the damp jacket was backing away into the dark. Marcus let him go. Because the man in the damp jacket was not the problem. The man in the damp jacket was just a piece of the problem, and the problem was behind Marcus in the parking lot somewhere, wearing a leather cut with a treasurer's patch on it, making phone calls in the rain, and the problem had a name, and the name was Raymond Watts. And what Marcus was going to have to do about Raymond Watts before morning was going to change every single thing. He turned around. He looked at Derek, at Kelly, at Vic, at the 80 or 90 riders who had come around the building and were standing in the rain looking at him with the faces of people who understood that the situation had changed in a way they hadn't been told yet, but who were here regardless, and who were going to be here for whatever came next regardless, because that was what they were. Marcus looked at all of it and felt the specific weight of being the person in the center of it, of being the man that all of that was organized around. All of that loyalty and history and willingness to stand in the rain at 1 a.m. without being asked. And he felt it the way he had not felt it before, the full weight of it without the armor he usually wore when he acknowledged it. Behind him, Noah's voice, quiet, steady, the voice of a boy who had been through a night that had not finished with him yet. "Marcus," Noah said, "what's happening? What's happening?" And Marcus Kane, who had not had an answer for that question in 7 years, looked down at the boy and told him the only truth that was both honest and survivable. "Something we're going to fix," he said, "together." And the rain came down on all of them, and somewhere in the dark of the parking lot, Raymond Watts's phone lit up with an incoming call, and when Watts looked at the screen, what he saw there made him step backward into the shadow between two cars and put the phone to his ear and say, in a voice just barely above a whisper, words that if Marcus had been close enough to hear them, would have told him that the night was not almost over. It was just beginning. The rain had become a real thing by 2 a.m. Not the tentative advance drops of an hour ago, but a committed full-body rain that fell on the hospital parking lot with the indifference of weather that has somewhere to be and is not adjusting its schedule for anyone. It darkened the asphalt to black mirror and collected in the seams between concrete panels and ran off the chrome of 600 motorcycles in thin silver lines. It soaked through jacket shoulders and ran down necks and made the cold a different category of cold. The wet kind, the kind that gets into the joints and stays. Nobody left. That was the thing that Reeves noted when he came back out of the hospital at 2:03 and stood under the narrow overhang of the entrance and looked at the lot. 600 people in the rain, and not one of them had moved toward their machines with the intention of leaving. Some had pulled on rain gear from their saddlebags. Most hadn't bothered. They stood or sat or leaned against their bikes with the particular patience of people for whom discomfort had long since ceased to be a reason to stop doing something. Marcus was at the far edge of the lot, under the single working light of a pole that the rain was doing its best to blur. Vic was beside him. Derek and Kelly had positioned themselves 10 feet back in the way that Brotherhood members position themselves when the president is in a conversation that requires both privacy and visible backing. Reeves crossed the lot toward them, his shoes collecting water with each step, and the riders he passed parted for him without being asked. Not deferentially, not with any warmth, but with the acknowledgement of someone whose function in the current situation had been communicated through the group with the speed that information travels through tight networks. Marcus looked at him when he arrived. "Watts is gone," Marcus said. It was not a question. "His vehicle left the lot approximately 12 minutes ago," Reeves confirmed. "We have people on him." "You have people on him," Marcus said. "You've had people on him. For how long?" 8 months of active coverage. Reeves met the look without flinching. "We needed the full picture before we moved. Moving too early would have—" "While you were building your full picture," Marcus said, "he was inside my organization, running money through accounts that have my name adjacent to them, recruiting from chapters that I vouched for. And tonight he showed up at a scene involving a witness in your case with 4 riders from a chapter that your investigation has connected to Hargrove, and you let him leave." Reeves said, "We tracked him leaving. We know where he's going." "That's not what I asked." A silence in the rain. A drop ran off the brim of Reeves's jacket hood and fell in a straight line to the asphalt. "No," Reeves said. "We let him leave. Because taking him in tonight, here, in front of this many witnesses, without the U.S. attorneys sign off on timing, would compromise the woman in that hospital," Marcus said, his voice dropping one register. "And that boy. If Watts makes a call tonight, if he tells whoever sent that man to grab the kid that their window is closing, then this hospital becomes a problem instead of a safe place. You understand that?" Reeves said, "We have agents inside." "How many?" A pause. "2." Marcus looked at Vic. The look communicated something that required no words, and Vic took out his phone and stepped away and started making calls. Marcus looked back at Reeves. "2 federal agents," Marcus said, "in a hospital that has at least one exit without camera coverage, the east side door, which your target's associate used to access a child less than 20 minutes ago, against an organization that has been running logistics operations for 4 years and knows how to move people and resources without creating a readable trail." He let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to. "That's not enough." Reeves was quiet for a moment. "What are you proposing?" Marcus looked at the lot, at the Brotherhood standing in the rain, at the 140 feet between where he was standing and the entrance to the building that contained a woman who was a material witness and a boy who was her son and who had, several hours ago, run a mile down a dark highway and asked for help. "I'm not proposing anything," Marcus said. "I'm telling you what's going to happen. The Brotherhood is going to secure this building until dawn, every entrance, the parking structures, the ambulance bay. When the sun comes up and the U.S. attorney has done whatever the U.S. attorney needs to do, you can have your timeline back." He held Reeves's gaze. "But tonight, this building belongs to us." Reeves looked at the lot again. "At the math of 600 versus 2. "I can't officially sanction," he started. "I'm not asking you to sanction it," Marcus said. "I'm telling you what's happening." Reeves was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, "I need your people away from the agents inside. No contact, no interference with their operational. Done. And if something happens, if there's a physical confrontation, then there's a physical confrontation," Marcus said. "And your people document it and we deal with the aftermath in the morning. But nothing is getting into or out of this building tonight that shouldn't." Reeves looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man who has just made a calculation that is professionally uncomfortable and personally correct. He gave one short nod. Then he turned and walked back toward the entrance, pulling his phone from his jacket. Marcus turned to Derek. "Get it organized. East exit needs 4 people minimum, 2 visible, and 2 back. Ambulance bay, main entrance, the parking structure stairwells." He looked at the assembled Brotherhood, all those faces in the rain. "Tell them what it is, don't dress it up." Derek said, "They already know what it is." He was right. The information had moved through the lot in the way it always moved. Not through announcement, but through the accumulated weight of watched behavior, of positioned bodies and serious faces and the way Marcus had been standing for the last 20 minutes. By the time Derek walked back to begin the formal deployment, half the riders had already begun drifting toward the perimeter positions with the instinctive spatial logic of people who understood coverage. Marcus stood alone for a moment in the rain. Just a moment. The specific moment he allowed himself, in situations like this, to be a person rather than a function. He thought about Raymond Watts sitting across from him 9 years ago in a booth at a bar in Cheyenne, with the particular kind of certainty that some men carry about the value of what they're selling, and saying the Brotherhood was the last honest institution in a country that had run out of them. He thought about how that sentence had landed in his chest in the specific way that things land when they find a space that has been empty long enough to be waiting for them. He thought about what that emptiness had been called before he'd had the sentence to fill it with. He thought about his son, about a hospital in Colorado that had the same lights as this one. He pushed it back. He had one more push left in him tonight, maybe 2. His phone buzzed. Vic's number. He answered. "Talk." "Watts's vehicle is at the Hargrove Logistics Freight Depot," Vic said, "the one on the industrial route east of town." Tomas ran the address when Reeves mentioned the name. It came up in property records. "It's a working depot, legitimate on the surface, been operating out of Sturgis for 3 years. A pause. "Marcus, there are 6 vehicles in that parking lot right now that weren't there at midnight. I've got two of ours sitting on the road outside, and they say there are lights on in the loading bay that weren't on an hour ago. Marcus processed this in the time it took to breathe in and out once. How many people can Watts mobilize from the Denver chapter on short notice? The four he brought are already here in the lot, but Denver's got a presence at the rally. They've got maybe 12, 15 more riders who came up for the week. If those riders are connected to Hargrove the way the investigation suggests, then they're not here for the rally, Vic said. They've been here because the woman's travel route was known and the depot is the staging point. Another pause. Marcus, if they move tonight, if Watts decides that with federal attention incoming, the timeline compresses and they need to deal with the witness situation before morning, they're not going to get to the hospital, Marcus said. We've got the building. I know, but that's not the only problem. Vic's voice changed. Not dramatically, just the degree of change that happens when someone arrives at the sentence they've been trying to figure out how to say. Tomas says one of the vehicles that arrived at the depot in the last hour is a dark SUV with Ohio plates. Columbus, Ohio. Marcus stood very still in the rain. Columbus, Ohio. Daniel Brooks. The boy's father. The man whose name was on the car. The man who had known for 11 weeks that his ex-wife had left with documents that could put him and his Hargrove associates in federal custody. He drove from Ohio, Marcus said. Or flew and picked up a vehicle, Vic said. Either way, he's here, tonight, and the depot is 12 minutes from this hospital. Marcus ended the call. He stood for exactly 3 more seconds in the rain. Then he walked to where Kelly was standing near the east entrance and said, "You're with me." Kelly didn't ask why. He fell into step. Derek appeared from somewhere to Marcus's left. Where? Depot on the industrial route. Watts is there. So is Daniel Brooks. Derek's face went through something that lasted less than a second. You can't go to that depot, Marcus. Someone needs to know what's being planned before it becomes a movement. Marcus kept walking toward his bike. If they're coordinating at the depot and they decide to move on the hospital, I need to know how many and from what direction and when. You can't coordinate a response to something you haven't seen. That's a reconnaissance argument for a situation that is going to turn into something else the moment you and 12 Denver riders are in the same building. I know, Marcus said. Derek stopped walking. Marcus kept going. Marcus. Derek's voice carried the specific quality of a man who has been through enough with another man to know exactly which words will land and who is choosing to use them anyway. You're going there because of Watts, not because of reconnaissance. Marcus stopped. He stood with his back to Derek for a moment, rain running off his cut, the parking lot noise of 100 quiet conversations around them. He turned. Both things can be true, he said. Derek looked at him for a long moment. Then he walked to his own bike. They rode out of the hospital lot at 2:19. Marcus, Derek, Kelly, Vic, and 7 other riders Vic had quietly selected from the assembled brotherhood. Not 600. 11. The number that could move quickly and quietly, and that wouldn't announce itself coming down an industrial road at 2 in the morning the way 600 machines would. They rode without formation, spread across a quarter mile, engines at a register that the rain and wind absorbed before it could carry. The industrial route was a 2-lane road that ran parallel to the freight rail line east of town, service road architecture. Streetlights every 100 yards instead of every 30, the particular functional ugliness of infrastructure that exists to be used rather than seen. The Hargrove Depot was a metal-sided warehouse building set back 60 feet from the road behind a chain-link perimeter. Standard freight depot layout, loading bay with roll doors on the eastern face, office section on the north end, parking in front. The lights in the loading bay were visible from the road as a diffuse glow through the translucent panels above the roll doors. Marcus pulled off the road 200 yards out and cut his engine, and the others followed. They walked the last stretch through wet gravel on the road shoulder, staying below the line of the chain link, in the dark between the street lights. There were 9 vehicles in the lot. Watts's rental. 4 others Marcus didn't recognize. 2 pickup trucks with Colorado plates. A dark SUV with Ohio plates, parked nearest the office entrance, with the particular placement of someone who considers themselves the most important vehicle in the lot. And a panel van, white, no markings, backed up to the closed roll door of the loading bay as if something was being loaded or unloaded. The van was the thing that stopped Marcus. He crouched in the dark at the fence line and looked at the van with the specific attention of someone who has learned through experience that the vehicle which doesn't fit the pattern of the others is always the one that tells you what's actually happening. The van had mud on its lower panels that was a different color than the local mud. Its tires were all season, not freight tires. And there was a person in the driver's seat, barely visible through the rain-streaked windshield, just the shape of a head and shoulders, someone sitting with the engine off who had not moved in the time Marcus had been watching, waiting. Vic was at his shoulder. "The van wasn't in Tomas's count," he said quietly. "It arrived after." "Someone called it here," Marcus said, "after we got to the hospital, after Reeves showed up." He looked at the office entrance. Faint movement behind the frosted glass panel beside the door. The shadow and light of people moving inside. "How many people do you count in the lot area?" "Two outside, one by the office door, one at the corner of the building." Vic's eyes moved with the practiced sweep of someone counting without appearing to count. "Could be more inside." "There are more inside," Marcus said. He looked at the van again, at the driver sitting in the dark, at the roll door it was backed against. He thought about logistics, about what a logistics company does when it needs to move something or someone quietly, about a panel van sitting backed against a loading bay door with its engine off and its driver waiting, about a woman in a hospital 12 minutes away who was the material thread connecting Daniel Brooks to Hargrove to the compromised national accounts of the Iron Covenant, about how cleanly all of that would resolve if the thread ceased to be available. The thought arrived fully formed, and it arrived cold. "They're not planning to come to the hospital," Marcus said. Vic looked at him. "They don't need to come to the hospital," Marcus said. "Not if they have someone already inside." He turned to look at Derek. Reeves said 2 agents inside. 2! He was already reaching for his phone. A hospital at 2 in the morning, skeleton nursing staff, 1 security guard per floor, visiting hours closed. How hard is it to reach a patient in a treatment room if you know the layout, and you have someone on the inside who's already there? He was dialing Reeves before the sentence was finished. The call connected on the second ring. "Someone's already in the building," Marcus said without preamble. "Not coming. Already there. The van here is the exit vehicle, not the entry. They're going to bring her out, not go in to get her. Which means," Reeves said, "hold." The sound of movement, fast movement, and then a voice in the background saying something urgent that Marcus couldn't make out. Then Reeves's voice came back, and it had changed. "One of my agents just reported an individual in surgical scrubs who doesn't match the staff registry attempting to access treatment room 3. Security has been..." A sound. Something that was not quite a shout but was in that direction. "We're responding." "Lock down every exit," Marcus said. "Everyone. Now." He ended the call and turned to the 11 men behind him in the dark and wet, and what he saw in their faces, in Derek's face, in Vic's face, in Kelly's face, that was not wound too tight now but was exactly as tight as the situation required, was the thing that made the Brotherhood what it was at its best. Not anger, not aggression, the specific quality of people who have oriented themselves completely toward a single purpose and are waiting only for the direction. "The van moves, we stop the van," Marcus said. "Nothing leaves this lot. I was through the chain link gate, not locked. Freight depots are not built for the kind of problem Marcus represented." Before the last word was finished, and the others came through behind him in quick single file, and they crossed the lot in the rain at a pace that was not running, but was everything running intends to be. And the man at the office door saw them at 30 feet and had time to say something, 1 word, and then Vic reached him and the conversation concluded without requiring language. The man at the corner of the building took longer to reach, and had more time to react and reacted poorly, which resulted in a brief and specific exchange that Derek managed with the efficiency of someone who spent 3 tours in environments where the ability to resolve confrontations quickly was a survival skill rather than a preference. Marcus hit the office door. Inside, fluorescent light, the smell of industrial space, metal and oil and something chemical underneath. And 3 men in a space that was arranged like an operations room rather than a freight office. Folding tables with laptops. A whiteboard with a diagram Marcus recognized as a hospital floor plan, and Raymond Watts standing at the far table with a phone in his hand, wearing an expression that moved through several stages in the 1 second it took Marcus to cross the threshold. Surprise. Calculation. The specific micro-expression of someone determining which version of this confrontation gives them the best available outcome. He settled on a version. Marcus, he said. His voice was the reasonable voice, the voice from the booth in Cheyenne 9 years ago. Let me explain what you're looking at here. Don't, Marcus said. This isn't what... Don't. The word came out with a quiet that was not calm. It was the quiet of someone who has moved past the part of confrontation where words are being assessed and is now in the part where they are simply being registered. I know what the van is for. I know what the floor plan is. I know what Hargrove is. And I know what you've been doing with the national accounts. And I know you've had someone inside that hospital for the last hour. Watts' jaw tightened. The reasonable voice left. What replaced it was something older and less managed. You have no idea what you've put in motion tonight. That woman and whatever she thinks she has, it doesn't matter. The case doesn't survive without her testimony, and she is not going to be in a position to... She's going to be fine, Marcus said, because there are 600 people around that building, and your van driver is not going to find any version of tonight where that changes. The two men at the tables had stood up. They were large, and they had the particular prepared quality of people who had been hired for situations that required it. They were also, Marcus noted with the peripheral assessment that old experience provides automatically, standing on the far side of the tables from him, which meant the tables were between them and him, which meant they were a problem that became a smaller problem if he didn't wait for them to navigate the tables. He didn't wait. He moved left, toward the near end of the table, and the movement pulled one of the men toward him. Instinct. The instinct to close distance when someone moves unexpectedly. And when the man came around the table end, Marcus was not where the man expected him to be, and what followed was brief and decisive and ended with the man on the floor with the particular stillness of someone whose body has voted to take a break from the proceedings. The second man was more careful. He came around the other side of the table and kept space between himself and Marcus, and set himself with the stance of someone who knew what he was doing. Marcus recognized the stance. He'd worn it himself 20 years ago, in conditions that had not been forgiving of mistakes. Kelly hit the man from behind, having come through the door behind Marcus with the timing of someone who had assessed the room in the first half second and gone directly to where he was most needed. The man went down next to the first one. Watts had not moved. He was still standing at the far table with his phone in his hand, and his face had settled into something that was not quite fear and was not quite the controlled register from before. It was the face of someone who has run out of the moves that usually work and is deciding whether to try one that probably won't. Marcus crossed to him. He stopped 2 feet away. He looked at the man who had sat across from him in a booth in Wyoming and told him that some institutions were still honest, and he felt the weight of the 9 years between that sentence and this moment. And he said nothing because there was nothing to say that the situation had not already said more clearly. Watts's phone buzzed in his hand. They both looked at it. The screen showed an incoming call. The name on the screen was 2 words. Daniel B. Watts looked at Marcus. Something in his expression shifted, not toward remorse, not toward resolution, but toward the specific bargaining posture of someone who still believes they have a chip. He's going to want an update, Watts said. When I don't answer, he's going to assume the situation has changed. And Daniel Brooks does not respond well to the assumption that the situation has changed. He held the phone up slightly. Let me answer it. Let me tell him to stand down. The man in the hospital, the van. I can call it off. You can call it off anyway, Marcus said, without the phone. He'll listen to me. He won't listen to... Raymond. Marcus's voice was very quiet. You've been making decisions for 9 years based on the calculation that I wouldn't look closely enough. That the Brotherhood's loyalty structure would make me trust what I was told by people above me in the organization. That I would take your word for what the Iron Covenant was supposed to be. He paused. You were right about that. For a long time you were right. He reached out and took the phone from Watts's hand. Watts let it go. But I'm looking now. He turned away from Watts and looked at Vic and said, secure him. Then he looked at the phone and at the name on the screen and at the rain falling past the single window of the freight office, and he thought about a woman in a treatment room and a boy in a waiting room chair and the distance between here and there and what was moving in that distance right now. His own phone rang, Derek's number. The van moved, Derek said. The words came out fast and tight. Driver must have gotten a signal. The van moved before we got eyes on the lot exit. It's on the industrial route heading west, toward the hospital. 12 minutes. How many of ours are outside the lot? Marcus said. 7, all on bikes. Go, Marcus said. Right now. Go. He was already running for his own machine, through the office door and across the wet lot in the rain, Kelly at his shoulder. And behind him he could hear Watts saying something that he did not stop to hear, and the sound of Vic's voice ending that sentence. And ahead of him his Harley was where he'd left it, and he hit it at a run and kicked it alive, and the engine came up under him with the specific violence of 650 cubic centimeters of American iron waking up angry. He came out of the depot lot onto the industrial route and opened the throttle all the way, and the machine surged forward into the rain dark, and the headlight carved the wet road ahead into a moving tunnel of light, and the sound was enormous and singular and swallowed by the storm above and the space around him. And somewhere ahead, in that dark, a white panel van was moving toward a hospital, and a woman who could not yet defend herself, and a boy who had already been through too much of this night. Behind him, the sound multiplied. 7 machines, then 9, then the deeper collective roar that meant the other riders from the lot had heard and followed, because that is what 600 people do when the president's engine goes to full throttle at 2:30 in the morning and points itself at something. The industrial route merged with the county road at a T-junction with a single stoplight swinging in the wind, and the light was red, and Marcus went through it at 90 miles an hour because the light did not apply to this. And the road opened into the wider darkness toward town. And ahead, maybe 600 yards, maybe less, he could see the red rectangles of a vehicle's taillights moving in the rain. The van, moving steadily, not panicking, moving with the particular purposefulness of a planned operation executing on its timeline, unaware that the timeline had broken down at its origin point. Marcus rode toward those lights with everything the engine had, and the rain came at him horizontal. Now in the wind of his own speed, and his hands on the bars were steady, and his breathing was controlled, and his eyes were on the taillights, and the road between him and them, and the sound of the Brotherhood behind him was the largest sound in the dark, and it was getting louder. The van's brake lights flared. The driver had heard the engines. The driver was making a decision. Marcus watched the brake lights and the swerve of the van as it accelerated again, and he felt the distance closing. And beside him now Derek appeared on the left, matching speed, and on the right Kelly appeared, and the three of them were in a line running down the county road toward the van in the rain, and the van was not going to make it to the hospital, and the van's driver was beginning to understand that. And Marcus Kane was 52 years old and soaking wet and running on something that was not adrenaline and not rage, and was not a feeling he had a ready name for, but that had started the moment a small boy hit the door of the Thunder Road Saloon and said one word, and it had been building for 3 hours, and it was running at full capacity now, burning clean and cold. And the distance between him and the van was 300 yards and 200, and the van was slowing, and Marcus was not. And when the van's brake lights came on fully, and the vehicle pulled hard to the shoulder of the road and stopped, Marcus came in behind it and laid his bike sideways on the wet road in a controlled slide that brought him to a stop 8 feet from the van's rear doors, the Harley on its side, and Marcus already off it, and on his feet before it finished moving, wet and breathing hard and absolutely steady. The van's engine was still running, rain drummed on its roof, the taillights painted everything red. Nobody came out of the van. Marcus stood behind it in the rain and looked at the rear doors, and behind him he could hear the Brotherhood arriving, machines pulling to the shoulder in both directions, headlights illuminating the road and the van, and Marcus standing there between them, and the entire scene was lit in that flat, comprehensive way. Every detail present, nothing hidden, everything visible in the rain and the headlights of 600 machines arrayed in the dark. The driver's door opened, and the man who stepped out was not the driver Tomas had described. He was not one of the Denver riders or a Hargrove Logistics employee or anyone the Brotherhood had encountered tonight. He was 43 years old and thick through the shoulders, and he had the specific face of someone who has arrived at a situation that has gone differently than planned and who is not yet done recalculating. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the road behind Marcus, at the wall of headlights. "Daniel Brooks," Marcus said. The rain fell between them. Daniel Brooks looked at the man standing in front of him, water running off his cut, 9 years of road and grief and leadership in his face, utterly motionless despite the cold and the wet and the hour. And then he looked at what was behind Marcus, at the 600 lights and the sound and the collective, patient, absolute presence of people who had decided something and were not going to be moved from it. He put his hands up. Not in surrender exactly, in the specific gesture of a man who has completed the calculation and arrived at the only number that makes sense, and who is being honest, for the first time tonight, about what that number means. Marcus held his gaze for a moment. Then he took out his phone and called Reeves. "The van is stopped on the county road, half-mile east of the hospital," he said. "Daniel Brooks is here. The driver is here. You need people here now." He paused. "The hospital is clear?" Reeves said, "The individual in scrubs is in custody. The two agents have secured treatment room 3. The patient is stable." A pause. "The boy is fine. He's asking for you." Marcus stood in the rain with his phone and breathed. The boy was asking for him. The Brotherhood was arrayed behind him in the headlights and the rain. Daniel Brooks stood with his hands up in front of the van. Somewhere across town, Raymond Watts was in the freight office being held by Vic with the particular careful handling of someone who had a lot to answer for and was going to be given the opportunity to answer for it in conditions that were considerably less comfortable than a booth in Cheyenne. The night was not over. But Marcus Kane stood in the rain and felt something shift in the weight he had been carrying, a specific degree of shift. Not the whole weight, not yet, but enough to change the balance. And he breathed once, deliberately, the way a man breathes when he has been running very hard for a very long time, and has arrived somewhere and is not yet sure what arriving means, but recognizes the fact of it. Behind him, someone cut their engine. Then another. Then another. One by one, the machines went quiet, and the headlights stayed on, and in the light and the rain and the silence of 600 engines at rest, Marcus Kane stood at the end of the longest night of the last 7 years, and waited for the morning that was going to have to answer for all of it. The rain stopped at 4:17 in the morning. Not gradually, not the way rain usually stops, tapering and hesitating and returning once more before finally committing to absence. It stopped the way it had arrived, decisively, all at once, as if whatever system had been driving it had completed its business and moved on without ceremony. The clouds thinned and then separated, and the stars appeared over South Dakota in the specific way they appear after a storm has washed the air clean. Not gradually, but all at once. The whole sky, more stars than any city person believes the sky actually contains. Marcus was sitting on the hood of a county sheriff's vehicle when it stopped raining. He had been sitting there for 20 minutes while Reeves and 2 other federal agents processed the scene on the county road. The van, Daniel Brooks in the back of a separate vehicle, the secondary driver who had come out of the van's passenger side with his hands already up and no argument in him at all. The Brotherhood had been asked to step back from the immediate scene, which they had done without being asked twice, because they understood the difference between their function and the function of formal process, and their function had ended when the van stopped moving. Marcus sat on the hood of the county vehicle and looked at the sky opening up and felt the cold come differently without the rain driving it. Drier, cleaner, the cold that comes after a storm rather than inside one. Vic appeared at his elbow with a cup of coffee from a thermos that materialized from somewhere in the convoy with the same quiet inevitability that useful things always materialized when the Brotherhood had been stationary long enough to organize itself. The coffee was black and very hot, and tasted like the kind of coffee that is made in quantity and drunk for function rather than pleasure. And Marcus held it with both hands and drank it and said nothing, and Vic said nothing beside him, and that was exactly the right amount of communication for what the moment required. Reeves walked over at 4:31. He had a different quality about him than he'd had at the hospital. The professional control was still there, but the edges of it had loosened slightly, the way a person's bearing loosens when the immediate critical phase of something has resolved and the body is beginning to process the permission to be tired. He stopped in front of Marcus and looked at him for a moment. "Daniel Brooks is in federal custody," he said. "The individual from the hospital is in custody. Watts," a pause that contained something. "Watts is being transported from the depot. There will be arraignment proceedings beginning tomorrow." He looked at the county road and the departing vehicles. "You're going to be asked for a formal statement, not tonight, but soon." "I know," Marcus said. "The Brotherhood's involvement tonight." Reeves stopped, chose the words with care. "It's complicated, from a procedural standpoint." "I know that too." Reeves looked at him. "The Iron Covenant's name is going to be in this case, in the financial documentation, in the account records. Your name is going to be adjacent to things that are going to require explanation. Yeah, Marcus said, it is. For what it's worth, Reeves stopped again. Then he said plainly, without the professional buffer, what you did tonight, on this road and at the hospital, that's going to be in the documentation too. All of it. I'll see to that personally. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded once. The nod of someone who acknowledges a thing without making more of it than it is. Reeves turned and walked back to his people. Marcus finished the coffee. He looked at the stars. He thought about Raymond Watts in a booth in Cheyenne 9 years ago, and the specific sentence that had found the empty space in his chest and filled it, and he thought about the fact that the sentence had still been true, even if the man saying it had not been. The Brotherhood was still what it was. What it had done tonight on a dark highway and in a hospital parking lot and on this county road in the rain was still what it was. Those two things, the corruption of one man in a position of trust and the genuine character of 600 people who had never known about it, were not the same thing, and he was going to have to spend a significant amount of the coming months making that distinction clear to people whose job it was to be skeptical of it. That was a cost. He was willing to pay it. He slid off the hood of the vehicle and handed the empty cup back to Vic and said, "Take everyone back to the hotel. Everyone sleeps. Nobody rides until after 8. Vic said, "And you?" "I'm going to the hospital," Marcus said. Well, the waiting room had not changed. Same plastic chairs, same low table, same television running captions in the dark. But the elderly man with folded hands was gone, and the teenage girl who had been sleeping under her jacket was gone. And in their place was the particular quality of emptiness that waiting rooms acquire in the last hours before dawn, when the night shift is at its longest distance from morning and the room feels suspended between things. Noah was not in the chair where Marcus had left him. Marcus stood in the entrance to the waiting room for a moment. Then the night nurse, not Paulson, a different one, younger, with the specific exhausted alertness of the 4 a.m. shift, looked up from her station and said, "You're with the Brooks family?" "Yes," Marcus said. The word came out with the same natural weight it had when he'd said it before, in front of Paulson, gesturing at Noah. He did not examine that. "She's awake, the nurse said. She's been awake for about an hour. The boy is with her. Room 3, down the corridor, second left." Marcus walked the corridor. The linoleum was a specific shade of green that hospitals had been using since before he was born, as if the color had been determined at some point to be the correct color for these floors, and no subsequent generation had seen sufficient reason to argue. The lights were at half brightness, nighttime mode, conserving energy and the sleep of patients whose rooms opened to the corridor. His boots were quiet on the linoleum, or as quiet as boots like his ever got. He stopped outside room 3. Through the partially open door he could hear voices. A woman's voice, low and still rough at the edges with whatever residue a night like this leaves in the throat. And a boy's voice, higher, talking with the particular velocity of someone who has been holding a story in a container for hours and is now finally being allowed to let it out. He heard Noah say, and then he went to one knee, right in front of me, in front of everybody, like it was just normal. A pause. Then the woman's voice. "He went to one knee. He's big, Mom, like really big, and he has all these," a gesture Marcus couldn't see but could infer, "and he just went to one knee and said his name." Silence for a moment. Then, "What did you say?" "I said mine." A beat. "I said Noah." Another silence, longer. Marcus stood in the corridor and did not move. "Baby," Elena Brooks said. Her voice was the voice of someone who has been through a medical event that the body remembers before the mind fully does, rough and careful and containing an emotion that was too large for the available words. "You ran a mile. You told me to get help. I told you to get help. So I got help." A pause. The simplest accounting. "I got a lot of help." Marcus pushed the door open. The room was standard hospital, bed, monitors, the arterial green of the equipment lights in the dim, an IV line still running into Elena's left arm. She was propped up at about 40 degrees, and she was not what Marcus had expected, though he examined that expectation and found it had been vague in the way that expectations are when they've been formed entirely through the reports of others and the evidence of crisis rather than the person themselves. She was 36. She had dark circles under her eyes that were not just from tonight, but from a longer accumulated exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who has been doing everything alone for long enough that the body has stopped distinguishing between the weight of a particular day and the weight of the ongoing situation. Her hair was pulled back with the careless competence of someone who does not have bandwidth to care about hair right now. She had the forearm with the old bruising tucked against her side, which may have been unconscious. She looked at Marcus in the doorway, and there was a moment, a specific, quiet moment, in which two people who have never met assess each other across the accumulated evidence of a shared night, and in that assessment communicate things that would take considerably longer to put into words. Noah, sitting in the chair beside her bed with his knees pulled up, looked at Marcus with an expression that was the most relaxed expression Marcus had seen on his face all night. "You came back," Noah said. "I said I would," Marcus said. He stepped inside. He stood at a reasonable distance from the bed, close enough to be in the room properly, far enough to not be imposing. And he looked at Elena Brooks, and she looked at him, and neither of them spoke for a moment, because neither of them had yet identified which sentence was the right one to start with. Elena got there first. "My son tells me you're the reason he's sitting next to me right now instead of alone in a waiting room." "Your son is the reason he's sitting next to you," Marcus said. "He ran a mile in the dark and walked into a room full of people who looked like us and asked for help." "That's not something I did. That's something he did." Elena looked at Noah. Something moved across her face that Marcus looked away from because it was private. "He also tells me," she said, and her voice was steadier now, "that there are motorcycles in the parking lot." "Some of them," Marcus said. "Most of the riders went back to the hotel." "Some of them," she said. "How many is some?" Marcus considered this. "Enough," he said. Something happened at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but the infrastructure of one. "He told me about the man," she said. The tone changed, not dramatically, just the degree of change that happens when a conversation turns toward the thing it was actually building toward. "Outside, in the parking lot." "He's been taken into custody," Marcus said, "along with your ex-husband." The words landed. Elena's face did not collapse. It was the face of someone who had been preparing for a version of this news for long enough that when it arrived, it produced not surprise, but something more complicated, the specific compound feeling of relief and grief and anger and exhaustion that comes when a threat you have been running from finally gets named and caught. "Daniel," she said. Not a question. "Yes." Her jaw worked once. She looked at her son. Noah was watching her with the careful attention of a child who is reading the room. Not afraid, not uncertain, but present and paying attention in the way he'd been paying attention to things all night. "He knows?" she asked Marcus. "He knows there was a man outside," Marcus said. "He knows the man is gone and isn't coming back. The rest," he paused, "that's yours to tell in the way and the time that's right." Elena held his gaze for a moment. There was something in her eyes that was not gratitude exactly, or not only gratitude. It was the look of someone who has been managing everything alone and who has just been offered, by a stranger, a decision rather than a directive, and who recognizes the difference and what it means. "The documents," she said. "The ones I gave the federal—" "They have them," Marcus said. "What you carried out of Ohio is going to do what you needed it to do." She exhaled, a long, controlled breath that carried in it the specific weight of something that has been held for weeks. Her hand moved across the bed and found Noah's arm and rested there. "I didn't know," she said. "About the Brotherhood's involvement, about Hargrove and the accounts. When I contacted the federal investigators, I knew what Daniel was moving money for. I knew the names. I didn't know they connected to—" She stopped. "To your organization." "They connected to one man in my organization," Marcus said. "That's not the same thing." "No," she said. "I understand that now." She looked at him steadily. "I didn't understand it at midnight." "Most people don't," Marcus said. "Most people see the cut in the bikes and they make a calculation." "I know what calculation I was making when I drove through Sturgis on a back road at 11 o'clock at night," she said. "I was making the calculation of someone trying to stay invisible." She paused. "That didn't work out the way I planned." "No," Marcus said. "It didn't." Another corner of the mouth movement. This one got slightly further. Noah said, from his chair, with the conversational confidence of someone who has been listening to adults talk around a subject and has decided to aim directly at the center of it. Are we going to be okay? Both adults looked at him. Yeah, Marcus said. You're going to be okay. Both of us? Both of you. Noah held his gaze with the specific quality of a child assessing the reliability of an adult's statement, not cynically, not distrustingly, but with the careful rigor of someone who has learned that the important thing is not what is said, but whether the person saying it has earned the right to say it. Whatever he found in Marcus's face satisfied the assessment. He nodded. He settled back in the chair. He put his head on his mother's arm, on top of her hand, and closed his eyes, and was asleep within 30 seconds, with the absolute finality of someone whose body has been waiting for permission. Elena looked at her sleeping son for a long moment. Then she looked at Marcus. You've been up all night, she said. So have you. I was unconscious for most of it, she said. That's different. Marcus pulled the room's single chair to the far side of the bed, opposite Noah, a reasonable and unimposing distance, and sat in it. I'll stay until morning, he said. Until the federal people come to take your statement. After that, you won't need, what happened to your son? The sentence arrived without warning, not cruelly. The tone was careful, the directness of someone who has been through enough themselves to know that indirect approaches to important things are a form of disrespect. Marcus was still. Noah told me something you said to him, Elena said. On the highway. About what the brotherhood did for you. When you couldn't carry yourself. She held his gaze steadily, in the way she'd been holding it all conversation. Not aggressively, but completely, with the full attention of someone who considers eye contact a form of respect rather than a challenge. He said you told him that. Marcus looked at his hands. He looked at them for a long moment, the way people look at their hands when the thing they need to say is somewhere in the vicinity of the hands, and looking at them helps locate it. His name was James, Marcus said. He was 9 years old. He stopped. The stop was not the stop of someone who has lost access to the words. It was the stop of someone who is choosing the pace deliberately, because this sentence and the ones that follow have been kept at a specific distance for 7 years, and bringing them into a hospital room at 5 in the morning requires a particular kind of care. He had the same thing you have, type 1. He was diagnosed at 4. Another pause. We were on a camping trip. Just the two of us. I wasn't paying attention in the way I should have been. I was inside the tent. He'd walked down to the river. He stopped again. By the time I found him, it had been too long. The room was very quiet. The equipment ran its soft green light. Outside the half-open door, the night shift corridor maintained its 4 a.m. stillness. The Brotherhood carried me for about 2 years after that, Marcus said. I don't mean that as a figure of speech. I mean that literally, physically, there were men in the Sturgis chapter who made sure I ate and slept and didn't do the thing that a man in my state can do when the grief is bad enough and the road is long enough and the night is dark enough. He looked up from his hands. I don't know what I would have done without them. I know what I thought about doing. I know what the road looked like on the nights when the thinking was loudest. He held her gaze. Derek was one of the men who sat up with me on those nights. So was Vic. So was a man named Carver, who died of a heart attack 3 years ago, and who I think about every time I ride past the city limits of Cheyenne. Elena said nothing. She was looking at him with an expression that was not pity. He would have known pity and would have quietly left the room for it. But something else. Recognition, maybe. The recognition of someone who has carried their own version of a weight and understands, not theoretically but in the body, what it costs. Noah reminded me of him, Marcus said. Tonight. Not in the way he looks, in the way he moves through something that is too big for him. The jaw, the spine, the refusal to stop. He paused. James had that. He had that quality of, not bravery, exactly, just refusal. The refusal to be as small as the situation wanted him to be. Elena's hand tightened very slightly on Noah's sleeping head. I'm sorry, she said. The words were simple, and she said them simply, without the elaborate scaffolding people sometimes build around condolence because they're afraid of the weight the bare words carry. Just the words. Yeah, Marcus said. So am I. He looked at the sleeping boy. But tonight was something. He stopped. Started again. I haven't been that present. In a long time. I've been going through the motions of it. Leading, organizing, showing up, but not present. And tonight, he shook his head slightly. That boy, what he did tonight, it got through something. He tends to do that, Elena said quietly. He's been doing that to people his whole life. He's going to be fine, Marcus said. You know that. I know that, she said. Montana's a good place, Marcus said. I've ridden through it more times than I can count. There are worse places to start over. There are worse places, she agreed. They sat in the quiet of the room for a while after that, the two of them on either side of the sleeping boy. And the quiet was not uncomfortable. It was the quiet of people who have been through something together that has no adequate language and who have decided, mutually and without discussion, to simply be in the room where it happened without trying to make it into something more summarizable than it was. Dawn came to Sturgis the way it always does after a storm. Suddenly, and with complete commitment, the eastern sky going from black to gray to a particular luminous pink in the space of 20 minutes, as if the night had been holding its breath and was now letting it go. Marcus was outside when it happened, standing in the hospital parking lot with a second cup of terrible coffee that had materialized from the same collective brotherhood infrastructure as the first. The lot was mostly empty now. The brotherhood had gone back to the hotel as instructed, and the federal vehicles had departed with their passengers, and the county patrol units had returned to their routes. And what remained was the particular quiet aftermath of a large thing that has ended, the specific quality of empty space that was recently full. Derek was leaning against a streetlight post 15 feet away, also with coffee, also looking at the sky. Kelly was sitting on the curb near the entrance, forearms on his knees, looking at nothing specific in the middle distance in the way of someone whose body has gone beyond tired to the flat terrain on the other side of it. They had been like that for about 20 minutes. Nobody had said anything because there was nothing that needed to be said, and they were all, in their different ways, occupied with the private accounting that happens when a long night ends, the going back through it, the examining of choices, the assessment of costs. Marcus crossed to Derek eventually. He stood beside him and looked at the sky. Kelly, Marcus said. It was not exactly a question. He's good, Derek said. He's better than good. A pause. You were wrong about him. I know, Marcus said. You said maybe. I know what I said. Derek drank his coffee. The Nebraska County Service he mentioned. I looked it up while we were sitting at the depot. 3 years, like he said. He was decorated for a pediatric response that went very badly and could have gone worse. Derek's voice was level. He quit after that. Came out here. Rode for about a year by himself before he approached the Brotherhood. Marcus processed this. He thought about the quality of Kelly's work on the highway, the competence of it, the specific manner in which competent people who have been hurt by their own competence move through emergency situations, carefully, thoroughly, with a private awareness of what it costs that they do not share with anyone. His patch review is in 3 weeks, Marcus said. I know when it is, Derek said. Move it up, Marcus said. Do it before we leave Sturgis. Derek looked at him. The board process requires... Derek, Marcus said. Derek looked at the sky. I'll talk to the board, he said. They stood in the quiet for another while. The pink in the east was deepening toward gold, and the specific quality of the light was the quality that only exists for about 15 minutes on clear mornings after rain. Everything washed, everything illuminated from the side, the long shadows of objects stretching away westward in thin, precise lines. Marcus thought about Raymond Watts. He thought about the arraignment proceedings that Reeves had mentioned, the formal statement he would have to give, the legal and organizational processes that were going to occupy months of his life as the Iron Covenant's name was examined in connection with things that Marcus had not known about and had not done. I thought about the National Board Review and what it would find and what it would mean for the charter of the Sturgis chapter in his own position. He thought about the specific and unpleasant work of rebuilding trust in an organization whose national leadership had been using it as cover for something that betrayed every word of the founding document. He thought about all of this, and he felt the weight of it, and he did not look away from the weight, because looking away from weights is how you stop knowing how heavy they are, and Marcus Kane had always needed to know how heavy the things he was carrying were. It was heavy. He was going to carry it anyway. That was not in question. Kelly stood up from the curb and came over. He stood on the other side of Derek from Marcus and looked at the sky too. 3 men in front of a hospital at dawn with bad coffee, not talking. Eventually, Kelly said, "Is she going to be all right?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "The kid?" "Yeah." A pause. "Good," Kelly said. The word came out with a specific simplicity that was not naivety, but its opposite. The simplicity of someone who has learned to receive good news plainly, without complicating it, because they know from experience how rare it is. At 7 in the morning, Reeves came to take Elena's formal statement. He brought another agent, a woman named Carver. No relation, just a name the world kept handing Marcus as if testing something, who was methodical and kind with Noah in the way of professionals who have been trained to manage the presence of children in difficult circumstances. Marcus waited in the corridor. At 7:45, a hospital administrator came to discuss the matter of Elena's treatment and the associated costs, and Marcus intercepted this conversation before it reached the room. The conversation lasted approximately 4 minutes, at the end of which the administrator went away with Marcus's personal insurance information and a card from Derek Sloan, whose professional liability coverage from his Brotherhood-sponsored medical certification turned out to apply to situations of exactly this kind. Elena, when Marcus told her about this afterward, said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "You didn't have to do that." "No," Marcus said. "I had coverage through—" "I know," Marcus said. "Reeves told me. Your insurance lapsed when you left Ohio." He held up a hand before she could respond. "It's handled. The Brotherhood's emergency fund covers it. We have one. Most people don't know that, for situations that require it." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she said. "Not why did you do this exactly. More the broader question. The question underneath the question. The why that encompasses the entire night." Marcus thought about it. He could have given a founding document answer, something about the charter and the Brotherhood's stated commitments to the communities where it operated. He could have given a personal answer about James and what the night had opened. Both would have been true. He gave neither of those. "Because Noah ran a mile," he said, "in the dark, alone, toward the only lights he could find, and they happened to be our lights." He paused. "That's not nothing. You don't just walk away from that and call it a good night's work and get on the highway. That's not how it works." Elena looked at him for a while longer. Then she looked away at the window, at the morning light coming through it, and she let out a breath that was not quite a sigh and not quite a laugh, but somewhere in between. The breath of someone who has been through a very long night and has arrived at the morning and is only now beginning to believe that the morning is real. At 9 o'clock, most of the Brotherhood was in the hospital parking lot. Not all 600. Some had ridden out at first light, their rallies and obligations and the rhythms of their own lives pulling them back to the highway. But enough. More than enough. Enough that when Elena came out of the hospital entrance at 9:15, one arm around Noah and the other managing the bag that a nurse had carried for her, she stopped at the automatic door and looked at the lot and went still for a moment in the way that people go still when something they expected to be one size turns out to be another size entirely. Noah looked at the lot and grinned. It was the first full grin of the night, the first expression on his face that was entirely forward-facing, unqualified by whatever was behind it. Marcus was at the front of the assembled group, which was where he usually was, and he walked across the lot to the entrance to meet them. He looked at Elena, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Noah said, "There's more of them now." "Word gets around," Marcus said. "Word about what?" "About what you did," Marcus said. Noah made a face that was 8 years old in the specific way of 8-year-olds who are being told they did something notable and are not sure whether to be proud or embarrassed. "I just asked for help." "Yeah," Marcus said. "That's the part." He reached into the pocket of his cut. He took out a small pin, heavy, silver, a specific design that was not the full Brotherhood patch, but was its own thing, something that had existed in Brotherhood tradition for a long time and was given rarely and without ceremony and meant, in the internal language of the Iron Covenant, that the person wearing it had the standing of family without the obligations of membership. He had talked to Derek about it in the corridor at 7 that morning, and Derek had produced it from somewhere in his kit. He kept one, had kept one for years, for the right occasion. He held it out to Noah. Noah looked at it. He looked at Marcus. "Is that—" "It means you're known to us," Marcus said. "Anywhere you go, Montana, Ohio, anywhere. You show that to someone wearing this—" He touched his own cut. They'll know who you are, and they'll know what you did. He paused. It doesn't mean anything complicated. It just means you're not a stranger. Noah took the pin with both hands. He held it for a moment with the careful attention of someone receiving something that has weight and recognizes the weight. He looked up at Marcus. His jaw was doing the thing it had been doing all night, the adult set, the refusal to be smaller than the moment. Thank you, he said. Thank you, Marcus said. Elena put her hand briefly on Marcus's arm. One touch, firm and brief and complete, the touch of someone who does not make unnecessary gestures and who means everything by the ones they do make. Marcus met her eyes, and she met his, and everything that needed to be communicated in that exchange was communicated without requiring the architecture of language. Then Vic appeared at his shoulder and said quietly, "We're ready when you are." Marcus nodded. He looked at the lot one more time, at the assembled brotherhood, all those machines, all those faces in the morning light, weathered and scarred and present in the specific way that people are present when they have been through something together and have arrived on the other side of it. And he felt the weight he had been describing to Elena in the room, and he felt it with full clarity, and he did not put it down. He carried it. But it was different now. It had company. He walked to his machine. The Brotherhood rode the Brooks family out of Sturgis the way they had ridden onto that highway in the dark. In formation, without being asked, with the organic precision of 600 people who understand their function in a particular moment. Elena's repaired Subaru, Vic had made 3 calls before 7 a.m., and a mechanic who owed the Brotherhood a favor had come to the hospital lot and worked on the car for an hour with the focused efficiency of someone who is paying a debt they're glad to pay. Moved through the middle of the formation with the particular protected quality of something the group has decided it is responsible for. Noah sat in the passenger seat and watched the motorcycles around them through the window with an expression that was fully awake and fully present, that contained no residue of the night's terror, but only the clear-eyed attention of someone watching something they will remember for the rest of their life and knows it. They rode through Sturgis, and the morning light fell on all of it, on the chrome and the leather and the face of Marcus Kane in the lead, road-worn and gray-bearded and 52 years old, riding at the front of 600 people through the streets of a town that had witnessed, in the last 8 hours, something that would be talked about in certain circles and not talked about in others, and that would mean different things to different people, and that meant, to Marcus, exactly one thing. The highway opened up beyond the city limits. The big empty South Dakota morning, washed clean by the night's rain, stretching away in every direction with the specific generosity of space that the Great Plains offer to anyone willing to move through them. One by one, the machines peeled away. Not all at once. Gradually, each rider finding the point at which the road required them to go their own direction, lifting a hand as they went, the Brotherhood's version of a formal farewell, simple and complete. They peeled away into the distances that were their own lives, eastward toward Rapid City, southward toward the Nebraska border, westward toward Wyoming and the mountains and whatever waited there. Marcus rode at the front until the Subaru was clear of the city, clear of the last intersection, clear of everything that had happened in the night. Then he pulled alongside the driver's window, and Elena lowered it, and the road noise came in around them both, and he looked at her, and she looked at him. "Montana's north on 85 to Alzada and then 212 west," he said. "Straight shot. You'll be there by afternoon." "I know the way," she said. "I know you do," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "Marcus." "Yeah." "What you told me last night. About James." She held his gaze the way she'd held it all night, completely, without looking away. "I'm glad you told me." Marcus said nothing. "I think he would have liked Noah," she said. The road ran under them. The wind came across the open land from the west, carrying the smell of wet earth and distance and the specific cleanness of air that has been thoroughly rained upon. "Yeah," Marcus said, "he would have." He fell back. He let the Subaru pull ahead of him on the highway, watched it move away into the morning light. The silver car getting smaller, the highway straightening out toward the northwest, the light coming at a low angle from the east and catching the car's rear window in a brief gold flash before the road curved slightly and the flash was gone. He sat on the idling Harley on the shoulder of the highway for a while. Derek pulled up beside him on the left, Kelly on the right, Vic behind them. They sat there in the morning without talking, watching the point where the highway curved into the distance, where the Subaru had gone and the road had continued without them. Marcus thought about the toast he had never delivered, about the words he had been working on in the back of his mind when a door opened and a boy came through it and changed the shape of the evening entirely. He thought about what he would have said, about loyalty, about showing up, about what it costs to be the kind of people who don't look away when the thing in front of them requires something. He thought about the fact that none of that needed to be said anymore, that it had been said already, in the way that the only things worth saying eventually get said. Not in words at a podium, not in a prepared statement at an annual gathering, but in action and darkness and rain and the accumulated weight of people who have decided, without making a production of the decision, who they are. He started his engine. The sound of it came up clean and strong in the morning air, and Derek started his beside him, and Kelly beside Derek, and Vic behind them all, and the four of them moved back onto the highway, heading back toward Sturgis, toward the rest of the Brotherhood and the rest of the rally and the ordinary complicated work of the coming days. The road stretched ahead of them, long and empty and lit from the east, the white line running through the middle of it as straight as an intention. Marcus opened the throttle and the wind came. And somewhere to the northwest, a silver car moved through the morning toward Montana, and a boy with a Brotherhood pin in his closed fist pressed his forehead against the passenger window and watched the land go by. And his mother drove with both hands steady on the wheel and her eyes on the road, and neither of them spoke for a long time because neither of them needed to. Because some things have already been said in the only language that counts, and the road ahead was theirs, and it was long, and it was clear,